This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. The roads were pitch black, winding through dense forest with hardly another vehicle in sight. My high beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. We had the radio on low, some classic rock station fading in and out as we lost signal in the boonies. I was zoning out a bit, the monotony of driving getting to me after hours on the road. My eyes were starting to feel heavy, and I was considering asking Jake to take over for a bit. That's when I saw it. Just at the edge of my headlights, a creature darted across the road. At first I thought it was a dog or coyote, but as it turned to look at us, I realized this was no normal animal. It was about the size of a pit bull, but with a face like a lion, broad snout, glowing eyes, and what looked like a mane. But the most unsettling part was its expression. It wasn't scared or startled like most animals caught in headlights. It looked menacing, aggressive, like it was challenging us. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things from fatigue. But when I looked again, it was still there for a split second before disappearing into the woods. My heart was racing and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. "Hey, did you guys see that?" I asked, glancing at Jake. He looked at me quizzically. "See what?" "That thing, that animal that just ran across the road." Jake shook his head. "Nah, man, I didn't see anything." "You sure you're not just tired? Want me to drive for a bit?" I looked in the rearview mirror at the two guys in back. They both shrugged, clearly having no idea what I was talking about. "No, I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Must have just been a coyote or something. But I knew it wasn't a coyote, or any other animal I'd ever seen before. The image of that creature was burned into my mind, its lion-like face, its predatory stance, those glowing eyes boring into me. I tried to shake it off, tell myself I was just overtired and seeing things. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. The rest of the drive passed uneventfully, but I couldn't stop thinking about that creature. When we finally got to the motel, I was wired despite my exhaustion. While the other guys crashed, I sat up researching cryptids and mysterious creatures of Arkansas. Nothing I found quite matched what I'd seen. I started calling it my personal chupacabra. Not because I thought it actually was the legendary goatsucker, but because I needed some way to categorize this unidentifiable beast in my mind. Plus, like the chupacabra, no one else had seen it. It was my own private monster. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly scanning the roadsides as we drove, hoping for another glimpse. Part of me was desperate to prove I wasn't crazy, to have someone else witness it. But another part of me was terrified of seeing it again, especially up close. I considered telling the guys about what I'd really seen that night, but I knew they'd just think I was losing it. So I kept it to myself, letting it gnaw at me as we finished up the job and headed home. Back in my own bed that weekend, I thought the whole thing would fade like a bad dream, but I found myself jolting awake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sure I'd heard scratching at my window. Of course, there was never anything there when I looked. I tried to put it out of my mind and get back to normal life, but that creature haunted me. I'd catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision, only for it to vanish when I turned my head. I'd wake up in a cold sweat from nightmares of being chased through dark woods by a snarling, maned beast. It got to the point where I was afraid to drive at night. I'd make excuses to get out of late shifts or evening plans. When I did have to be on the road after dark, I'd white-knuckle the steering wheel the whole time, eyes darting to every shadow and movement along the shoulder. About a month after the incident, I was heading home from a friend's place around midnight. I was on edge as usual, but trying to stay calm. That's when my headlights caught something on the side of the road up ahead. My blood ran cold as I recognized that distinctive silhouette. It was standing perfectly still, staring directly at my approaching car. As I got closer, I could make out more details: the broad feline face, the shaggy mane, the muscular build. But this time, I also noticed something I hadn't before. It seemed to be covered in some kind of scales or armor plating. My instincts screamed at me to floor it and speed past, but some morbid curiosity made me slow down instead. I needed a better look, needed to confirm what I was seeing was real. As I crawled past at about 15 up, the creature's eyes locked onto mine. They glowed an eerie yellow-green in my headlights. Its lips curled back in a snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. A low growl emanated from its throat, so deep I could feel it rumbling in my chest. I was frozen in terror, unable to look away or hit the gas. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, we stared each other down. Then, quick as lightning, it lunged at my car. I yelped and stomped on the accelerator, tires squealing as I peeled away. In my mirror, I saw the creature give chase for a few hundred feet before veering off into the woods. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. I didn't slow down until I hit the city limits, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of pursuit. When I finally made it home, I collapsed on my couch in a cold sweat. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no denying it now. This thing was real, and it seemed to be fixated on me for some reason. I barely slept that night, jumping at every little sound. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent hours online, desperately searching for any information on what this creature could be. I even reached out to some cryptozoology forums, but most people there thought I was making it up or mistaken. As the days passed with no further sightings, I started to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind after all. But then I noticed something disturbing: claw marks on the side of my car, right where the creature had lunged at me that night. 3 deep gouges in the metal, like nothing any normal animal could make. I knew then that this was far from over. Whatever this thing was, it was real, it was dangerous, and for some reason it had chosen me as its target. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid of what might be lurking just out of sight. To this day, I haven't seen the creature again, but I know it's out there, waiting. Sometimes at night I swear I can hear that low, rumbling growl outside my window. I've thought about moving, but somehow I know it would find me wherever I went. So I stay and I wait, wondering when my personal chupacabra will make its next appearance. All I know is that when it does, I'll be ready, because next time I'm not letting it get away without answers. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed something odd. The dogs in the kennel started going crazy, barking and howling like they'd seen a ghost. I tried to calm them down, but they were inconsolable. That's when I saw it, a strange, pulsing light coming from deep within the forest. At first, I thought it might be a crashed aircraft. We were used to all sorts of military exercises in the area, so it wasn't completely out of the ordinary. But as I got closer, I realized this was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The light was moving between the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and twist in impossible ways. It was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. I radioed back to base, reporting what I was seeing, but the response I got was skeptical at best. Probably just poachers with flashlights, they said. But I knew this was different. The light was too bright, too otherworldly to be anything man-made. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the air around me seemed to change. It became thick and heavy, like walking through invisible syrup. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel a strange vibration in my chest, almost like a silent bass drum pounding away. That's when I saw it. A massive triangular object hovering just above the tree line. It was enormous, easily the size of a football field, and it was completely silent. The surface was a dark, metallic color, but it seemed to shimmer and shift as if it wasn't quite solid. The most striking feature was the symbols etched into its surface. They weren't like any language I'd ever seen, more like complex geometric patterns that seemed to move and change as I watched them. It was hypnotic, and for a moment I forgot to be afraid. The object was emitting a soft, pulsing light from its underside, casting an eerie glow on the forest below. As I watched, transfixed, it began to move. But it didn't move like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It didn't so much fly as it seemed to bend the space around it, shifting position instantaneously without any apparent acceleration. I fumbled for my radio, trying to report what I was seeing, but it was dead, not just out of battery, but completely fried. The same went for my flashlight and watch. It was as if all electronics in the vicinity had been completely neutralized. As I stood there, a mixture of awe and terror washing over me, the object suddenly came to a stop directly overhead. The vibration in my chest intensified, and I could feel a pressure building in my head, like my skull was being squeezed in a vice. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot down from the craft, enveloping me completely. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even think clearly. It was like every cell in my body was being examined, catalogued, and rearranged. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in that beam of light. It could have been seconds, or it could have been hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning. When it finally released me, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The craft began to move again, this time ascending rapidly into the night sky. As it rose, it seemed to fold in on itself, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a pinprick of light among the stars. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I lay there on the forest floor for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My mind was reeling, unable to reconcile what I'd seen with my understanding of reality. When I finally managed to stumble back to base, I was a mess, covered in dirt, twigs in my hair, and babbling about lights in the sky. My superiors were skeptical, to say the least. They suggested I might have been drinking on duty, or perhaps I'd had some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But I knew what I'd seen was real. Over the next few days, reports started trickling in from other personnel on the base, as well as civilians in the surrounding area. They'd all seen strange lights in the sky, heard unusual noises, or experienced unexplained equipment failures. It was clear that something extraordinary had happened that night. The official investigation was a joke. They claimed it was all a misidentification of a lighthouse beam, or perhaps some sort of atmospheric phenomenon. But those of us who were there that night knew the truth. We'd seen something that defied explanation, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. In the years since that night, I've struggled to make sense of what happened. I've pored over books on physics, astronomy, and even fringe theories about extraterrestrial life. I've attended UFO conferences and spoken with other witnesses of similar events. But nothing has ever fully explained what I saw in Rendlesham Forest. The experience changed me profoundly. I left the military soon after, unable to continue serving in a system that seemed determined to cover up the truth. I've spent countless nights staring up at the stars, wondering if they're out there watching us, studying us, perhaps preparing for some future contact. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of that silent triangular craft hovering above me, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. I can still feel the vibration in my chest, still see those strange, shifting symbols etched into its surface. I know many people don't believe me. Hell, there are times I hardly believe it myself. But I know what I saw that night in Rendlesham Forest. I know that there are things in this universe far beyond our current understanding. And I know that someday, somehow, the truth will come out. Until then, I'll keep watching the skies, waiting for the day when that strange triangular craft returns. Because deep down, I know it's not a question of if, but when. And when it does come back, I hope we'll be ready for it. The incident at Rendlesham Forest may have faded from the public consciousness, dismissed as just another UFO hoax or misidentification. But for those of us who were there, who saw that impossible craft with our own eyes, it remains a pivotal moment in our lives, a moment when the veil of reality was pulled back, just for an instant, revealing a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we could have ever imagined. As I sit here, typing out this account, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see that familiar triangular shape silhouetted against the night sky. And part of me hopes I will. Because as terrifying as that night was, it was also the most incredible experience of my life. It opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered before, and it left me with a sense of wonder that has never faded. So if you're reading this, and you've ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if we're alone in the universe, let me assure you, we're not. There are things out there beyond our wildest dreams. I've seen them with my own eyes, and someday, maybe you will too. Until then, keep watching the skies, because you never know when something extraordinary might happen, just like it did to me on that cold December night in Rendlesham Forest. I was never much of a believer in UFOs or anything like that. Sure, I enjoyed sci-fi movies as much as the next guy, but I always chalked up alien sightings to overactive imaginations or people mistaking normal aircraft for something more exotic. That all changed last summer during what was supposed to be a relaxing camping trip with my 2 kids in the Ozarks. It was late August, and I had decided to take my 12-year-old son Jason and 10-year-old daughter Emily on one last adventure before school started up again. We rented this cozy little cabin nestled in the mountains, miles away from the nearest town. The kids were excited about roasting marshmallows, telling spooky stories, and maybe doing some stargazing away from all the light pollution of the city. The first couple days were great. We went hiking, fished in a nearby stream, and just enjoyed being out in nature together. On our 3rd night there, we decided to stay up late to try and spot some shooting stars. It was a crystal clear night, perfect for stargazing. We laid out some blankets in a small clearing near the cabin and settled in, pointing out constellations to each other. It must have been close to midnight when Jason suddenly sat up and pointed at something in the sky. "Dad, look! I think I see a satellite." I glanced to where he was pointing and saw a faint pinprick of light slowly moving across the star field. "Good eye, buddy," I said. "That's probably the International Space Station." We watched it for a few moments, and I was about to suggest we head inside when Emily piped up. "Wait a second. That's not a satellite. Look how it's moving." I focused back on the light, and my heart skipped a beat. The steady, predictable motion I'd initially seen was gone. Now the object was darting back and forth in quick, jerky movements that no satellite or conventional aircraft could possibly make. It would zip in one direction for a few seconds, then abruptly change course at impossible angles. "What the heck?" I muttered, sitting up straighter. The kids were transfixed, their eyes wide as they tracked the erratic dance of light above us. "Is it a drone, maybe?" Jason asked, but I shook my head. We were miles from anywhere, and even the most advanced consumer drones couldn't move like that. Plus, this thing seemed to be incredibly high up, much higher than any drone could reach. For several minutes, we watched in awe as the object continued its bizarre acrobatics. Sometimes it would hover motionless for a few seconds before suddenly shooting off in a new direction. Other times, it would trace tight circles or figure eights in the sky. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. In all my life, I had never seen anything move like this. It defied the laws of physics as I understood them. Suddenly, the light froze in place, hanging motionless directly above a nearby ridgeline. "Look, it stopped," Emily whispered urgently, pointing. The object hovered there, a brilliant pinprick of white light against the backdrop of stars. As we stared, slack-jawed, it seemed to slowly grow larger and brighter. Was it coming closer? A heavy feeling of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Some primal part of my brain was screaming at me to grab the kids and run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The light continued to expand, taking on a more defined circular shape. It had to be massive, far larger than any aircraft I'd ever seen. The entire clearing was bathed in an eerie glow as waves of light pulsed outward from the object. Emily whimpered and pressed closer to my side. I wrapped an arm around her protectively, my own heart pounding. Jason had gone completely still, his eyes huge as he gaped at the impossible sight above us. Just when I thought the light couldn't get any brighter, it suddenly flared with blinding intensity. I threw an arm up to shield my eyes, spots dancing in my vision. When I lowered my arm a few seconds later, the object was gone, vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there at all. The clearing was once again dark, lit only by the faint glow of starlight. For a long moment none of us spoke. I could hear the ragged sound of my own breathing, unnaturally loud in the silence. Finally, Jason broke the spell. "Dad?" he said in a shaky voice. "What was that?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I possibly explain what we'd just witnessed? I don't know, buddy," I admitted. Emily was trembling against me. "Was it aliens?" she asked in a small voice. "No, of course not," I said quickly, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It must have been, I don't know, some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, or maybe a military test of some new aircraft." Even as I said it, I knew how weak those explanations sounded. Nothing in my experience could account for what we'd seen tonight. "Let's head inside," I said, getting to my feet and helping the kids up. "It's late. We should try to get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easily that night. We left a light on in the cabin, and the kids insisted on all piling into my bed. As I lay there in the dark, listening to their steady breathing, my mind raced. What had we seen out there? Was it truly something otherworldly, or was there a rational explanation I was overlooking? Part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as a shared hallucination or trick of the light. But I knew deep down that wasn't the case. It had been all too real. The rest of our trip passed in a kind of daze. We went through the motions of our planned activities, but our hearts weren't in it. There was a sense of tension, of waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. No more strange lights appeared in the sky. When we got home, I spent hours online, searching for any reports of similar sightings in the area. I found a few vague stories of strange lights in the Ozarks over the years, but nothing that matched the incredible display we'd witnessed. It's been months now, and I still don't have any answers. The kids don't talk about it much, but I can tell it's always there in the back of their minds. Sometimes I'll catch Jason staring up at the night sky with a look of mingled fear and fascination. As for me, I find my certainty about the world has been shaken. If what we saw that night was real, and I'm convinced it was, then there are things out there beyond our current understanding, things that defy explanation. I don't know if we'll ever learn the truth about that strange, dancing light in the mountains, but I do know that I'll never look at the night sky quite the same way again, and a part of me will always be waiting, wondering if someday we'll see those lights return. Suddenly, something caught my eye that made me stop dead in my tracks. A massive dark shape was moving slowly across the starry expanse above me. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I focused on it, I realized with growing unease that this was very real. The object was enormous, far larger than any aircraft I'd ever seen. It had a distinct triangular shape with smooth edges, like an enormous flying wedge gliding silently through the night. The thing that struck me most was how utterly black it was, blacker than the night sky around it, so black that it completely blotted out the stars as it passed in front of them. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart pounding as I watched this impossible object continue its slow, silent journey across the heavens. It was moving steadily to the northwest, maintaining a perfectly straight course. There was no sound at all, not even the faintest hum or whisper that you'd expect from something that massive moving through the air. As I followed its path with my eyes, I noticed 3 dim reddish lights at each corner of the triangle. They didn't flash or blink, just glowed with a dull, steady light. The lights were tiny compared to the overall size of the craft. I've lived near a military base for years, and I'm very familiar with all kinds of aircraft. I've seen fighter jets, cargo planes, helicopters, you name it. But this was something entirely different. My mind raced as I tried to come up with some rational explanation, but I knew deep in my bones that this was not of human origin. The silence was the most unnerving part. Something that big should have been roaring through the sky, but there wasn't even the faintest whisper of sound. Just that massive black shape sliding effortlessly through the night like a hole cut out of reality itself. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to capture some evidence of what I was seeing, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. By the time I managed to open the camera app, the object had moved beyond my line of sight, obscured by the trees lining the road. I sprinted down the road, trying to get to a clearing where I could see it again. My heart was racing, and I could hear my ragged breathing echoing in the still night air. I emerged into an open field and scanned the northwestern sky frantically. There, I caught a glimpse of it again, now much further away. It was just barely visible, a black void against the starry backdrop. I raised my phone and tried to steady my hands enough to take a photo, but it was too far away now. The camera couldn't pick up anything in the darkness. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where I'd last seen it until my eyes ached, but it never reappeared. Eventually I realized I was shivering, the warm summer night suddenly feeling ice cold. In a daze, I made my way home. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. I knew what I'd seen was real, but I also knew that no one would believe me without proof, and I had nothing but my own rattled memories to go on. Over the next few days, I scoured local news and social media, desperate to find out if anyone else had seen it. But there was nothing. No reports, no sightings, nothing at all out of the ordinary. I started to question my own sanity. Had I really seen what I thought I saw, or was my mind playing elaborate tricks on me? But every time I closed my eyes, I could see that massive black triangle sliding silently across the star-filled sky. The image was burned into my brain. I knew with absolute certainty that it had been real. I've always been a rational, level-headed person. I'm not the type to believe in conspiracy theories or jump to wild conclusions, but that night shook me to my core. It forced me to confront the fact that there are things in this universe far beyond our current understanding. In the weeks and months that followed, I found myself constantly scanning the night sky, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious craft. But I never saw it again. Life went on as normal, but I was changed. That brief encounter left me with a profound sense of how little we truly know about the world around us. I still go for walks on summer nights, but now there's always a hint of anticipation mixed with the peacefulness. Part of me hopes to see it again, to confirm that it wasn't just a bizarre one-time occurrence, but another part of me dreads the possibility, fearing what it might mean for our understanding of reality. I've struggled with whether or not to share this experience. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I do. If someone had told me this story before that night, I probably would have dismissed it as the ravings of an attention seeker or someone who'd had too much to drink. But I know what I saw. It was as real as the ground beneath my feet. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm simply sharing my experience in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, someone else out there has seen something similar, that I'm not alone in carrying this burden of knowledge. To this day, I have no explanation for what I witnessed that summer night in Sweden. It defies everything I thought I knew about aviation and physics. All I know is that it was real, it was massive, and it was utterly silent. And somewhere out there, beyond our understanding, it still exists. The experience has left me with a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity that I can't shake. I find myself looking at the world differently now, always wondering what other mysteries might be hiding just beyond our perception. That massive black triangle opened my eyes to possibilities I never would have considered before. I still live near the military base, and I still see all kinds of aircraft on a regular basis. But now, every time I hear a plane overhead or see lights in the night sky, there's a moment of anticipation, a split second where I wonder if this time it might be something different. I don't know if I'll ever see anything like it again. Part of me hopes I do. I'll never forget that morning when I was 4 years old. It's one of those childhood memories that stays with you, vivid and strange, defying explanation even decades later. I was always an early riser as a kid, much to my parents' chagrin. That day, I woke up just as the first hints of dawn were creeping over the hills behind our house. The world had that hushed, ethereal quality it gets in those liminal moments between night and day. My bedroom was on the second floor, with a big picture window that looked out over our backyard and the wooded hills beyond. I loved sitting by that window, imagining all sorts of fantastical creatures lurking in the misty forests. That morning I crawled out of bed and went straight to the window, rubbing sleep from my eyes. The grass was heavy with dew, and wisps of fog clung to the tree line. Everything was still and quiet. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. I pressed my face against the cool glass, straining to see. There, a sinuous shape weaving between the trees, climbing the hill with impossible speed and grace. It was massive, easily the size of a school bus, but moved with fluid agility. The weak morning light glinted off rows of iridescent purple scales. I caught glimpses of membranous wings folded tight against its body, a whip-like tail, wickedly curved claws digging into the earth. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to shout, to alert my parents, but I was frozen in place, afraid that any movement would break the spell and make the creature disappear. In a matter of seconds, it had crested the hill and vanished from sight. I stayed glued to the window, waiting to see if it would reappear, my breath fogging the glass. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway. She poked her head in, frowning when she saw me out of bed. "What are you doing up already, sweetie? It's not even 6 a.m. I turned to her, eyes wide. "Mommy, I saw a dragon." She sighed, clearly not in the mood for flights of fancy so early. "Of course you did, honey. Come on, back to bed. It's too early to be up." "But I really did see one. It was huge and purple and climbing the hill super fast." My mother just shook her head, gently but firmly guiding me back to bed. "It was just a dream, sweetie. Dragons aren't real. Now try to get a little more sleep, okay?" I let her tuck me in, but I knew with absolute certainty that what I'd seen was real. How could it have been a dream when I was wide awake, standing at the window? The memory was so clear, so detailed. I could still see those gleaming scales, still feel the awe and wonder that had coursed through me. As I grew older, I clung to that memory. Even as I learned that dragons were mythical creatures, even as adults patronizingly explained that I must have dreamed it or let my imagination run wild, I couldn't shake the conviction that I had witnessed something extraordinary that morning. I became obsessed with dragons, devouring every book and movie I could find on the subject. I drew pictures of what I'd seen, trying to capture every detail before it faded. My parents indulged my fascination at first, but as the years went by, their patience wore thin. "Don't you think you're a little old for dragons?" my father would say when he caught me poring over some fantasy novel. My mother was gentler, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Honey, it's wonderful to have an imagination, but you need to be able to separate fantasy from reality." But how could I explain that this wasn't about fantasy for me? That somewhere deep in my bones, I knew what I had seen was real? As a teenager, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been some kind of large bird, distorted by the early morning light and fog, or a hang glider, though that didn't explain the scales or the way it moved. I researched local wildlife, wondering if there was some mundane explanation I was missing. Nothing fit. Nothing came close to explaining what I had witnessed. In college, I took a folklore class, hoping to gain some insight. We studied dragon myths from cultures around the world. I was fascinated by the similarities in descriptions across vastly different societies. How had so many isolated cultures come up with such similar ideas of these creatures? Was there some kernel of truth buried in the legends? I wrote my final paper on modern dragon sightings, combing through accounts of people who claimed to have seen these creatures in recent times. Most were easily dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but a few rang true in a way I couldn't explain. There was an old woman in Wales who described seeing a creature remarkably similar to what I had witnessed, right down to the purple scales. A group of hikers in the Appalachians who all swore they saw a massive serpentine shape soaring between mountain peaks. A child in Japan who drew picture after picture of a long, sinuous dragon he insisted lived in the lake near his home. Were we all delusional, suffering from some shared psychological quirk that made us see dragons where none existed? Or was there something more to it? I graduated and got a job, but I never stopped searching for answers. I joined online communities dedicated to cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. I went on camping trips to areas with reported sightings, spending nights staring at the sky and hills, hoping for a glimpse of something extraordinary. My friends and family grew increasingly concerned about my obsession. They tried to set me up on dates, encourage other hobbies, anything to get my mind off dragons. I went along with it to appease them, but my heart wasn't in it. How could I focus on mundane things when I knew there were wonders hiding just out of sight? Years passed. I had almost given up hope of ever seeing another dragon or finding someone who truly believed me. And then, on a crisp autumn morning, much like the one from my childhood, everything changed. I was hiking alone in a remote area of national forest, enjoying the solitude and vibrant fall colors. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I froze. There, not 30 feet away, was a creature that could only be described as a dragon. Smaller than the one from my childhood, maybe the size of a horse, but unmistakable. Scales the color of burnished copper, leathery wings folded against its sides. A long, serpentine neck topped by a wedge-shaped head. It was drinking from a stream, and at my sudden appearance, its head snapped up. We locked eyes, and I felt a jolt of recognition. There was ancient intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that went beyond anything I'd seen in an animal before. For a breathless moment, we stared at each other. Then, with a grace that belied its size, the dragon unfurled its wings and launched into the air. I caught a glimpse of it sailing over the treetops before it vanished from sight. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down my face, tears of joy, of vindication, of sheer awe at what I had witnessed. I wanted to shout it from the mountaintops. I wanted to call everyone I knew and tell them they were wrong, that dragons were real, that I wasn't crazy. But as the initial shock wore off, I realized something. This wasn't just about proving myself right. This was about protecting something magical, something that clearly didn't want to be found by the wider world. How long had dragons managed to survive, hidden on the fringes of our reality? What would happen if their existence became common knowledge? I thought of poachers, of scientists wanting to study them, of the loss of habitat they'd face as humans pushed ever further into wild spaces. No, I realized, this wasn't a secret I could share. This was a gift, a glimpse behind the veil at the wonders still lurking in the world's wild places. I never told anyone about that second sighting. But knowing it happened, knowing I wasn't alone in what I'd seen, brought me a peace I hadn't felt since that morning as a child. I still go hiking as often as I can, my eyes always scanning the skies and forests. I haven't seen another dragon since that day, but now, when I look at the world around me, I see it with new eyes. Every shadow holds the possibility of magic. Every unexplored corner of wilderness whispers of secrets waiting to be discovered. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist hangs low in the valleys, I could swear I hear the distant beat of leathery wings. We were all laughing and joking around, still riding the high of the weekend finally arriving. Jake was in the passenger seat next to me, while Mia and Tom were squeezed in the back. The streets were practically deserted at this hour, with most of the houses dark except for a porch light here and there. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. The rustling leaves, chirping crickets, and our own voices were the only sounds breaking the nighttime silence. Little did I know that serenity was about to be shattered in the most surreal way imaginable. As we approached the intersection of elm and oak, I noticed something odd in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was just a weird reflection from a streetlight or something, but when I turned to look, my breath caught in my throat. There, hovering about a foot above the asphalt, was a glowing green sphere about the size of a basketball. It seemed to be pulsing slightly, casting an eerie emerald light on the surrounding pavement. "Holy shit, do you guys see that?" I blurted out, slowing the car to a crawl. "What the—" Jake trailed off, leaning forward in his seat to get a better look. I heard gasps from Mia and Tom in the back seat as they spotted it too. We all stared in stunned silence as I brought the car to a complete stop about 20 feet from the object. For a few seconds, the sphere just hovered there, gently bobbing up and down. Then, without warning, it started to grow. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a balloon inflating, except 1,000 times creepier. In the span of maybe 5 seconds, that basketball-sized orb expanded until it was roughly the size of a car. The green light it emitted grew brighter too, bathing the entire street in its alien glow. "What the fuck is happening?" Mia whispered from the back seat, her voice trembling. None of us had an answer. We were frozen, unable to look away from the impossible sight before us. The expanded sphere pulsed a few more times, so bright now that I had to squint. And then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. No flash, no sound, nothing. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone without a trace. For a long moment, we all just sat there in shocked silence. The sudden darkness seemed oppressive after the intense green glow. I blinked hard, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. "Tell me you all saw that," Tom finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. We all nodded numbly, still staring at the now empty stretch of road where the sphere had been. Should we get out and look?" Jake asked hesitantly. Part of me wanted to floor it and get the hell out of there. But curiosity won out. Slowly, cautiously, we exited the car. The night air felt cooler than before, and goosebumps rose on my arms. We approached the spot where the sphere had appeared, our footsteps seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet night. There was nothing there, no scorch marks, no residue, not a single sign that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. "This is insane," Mia muttered, running her hand through her hair. "What the hell did we just see?" We spent the next 20 minutes or so examining every inch of that stretch of road, looking for any clue or explanation, but there was nothing. It was as if the whole thing had been some kind of shared hallucination. Finally, we piled back into my car, all of us visibly shaken. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what we had witnessed. Over the next few days, we talked about it constantly, trying to make sense of what happened. We scoured the internet for similar stories, reached out to local astronomers and physicists, even considered reporting it to the authorities. But we found no satisfying explanations. The few people we told either didn't believe us or suggested we had seen some kind of experimental aircraft or elaborate prank. But we know what we saw. That pulsing green sphere was like nothing that exists in our normal understanding of the world. It's been 3 months since that night, and I still get chills every time I drive past that intersection. Sometimes I find myself slowing down, half expecting to see that eerie green glow again. But the streets remain stubbornly normal, giving no hint of the inexplicable event we witnessed. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to paranormal stuff. UFOs, ghosts, cryptids. I never put much stock in any of it. But after what I saw that night, I can't help but wonder what other impossible things might be out there, just waiting to be discovered. Jake, Mia, Tom, and I have grown closer because of our shared experience. It's like we're members of some exclusive club now, bonded by a secret that few would understand or believe. We still talk about it sometimes, tossing around theories and speculating about what it could have been. Was it extraterrestrial? Some kind of interdimensional phenomenon? A glitch in the fabric of reality itself? We'll probably never know for sure. But one thing's certain. None of us will ever forget that night when the impossible became real, if only for a few breathtaking moments. I've started carrying a camera in my car just in case. Part of me hopes I'll never see anything like that sphere again. But another part kind of hopes I do, because now I know that the world is stranger and more mysterious than I ever imagined. And who knows what other wonders or terrors might be lurking just beyond the veil of our everyday reality. So if you're ever driving through a quiet suburb late at night and see something that defies explanation, don't just write it off. You might just be witnessing a moment when the extraordinary breaks through into our ordinary world. And trust me, it's an experience that will change you forever. I still can't shake the feeling that the green sphere was just the beginning of something bigger, like it was a test or a probe or a glimpse of something vast and incomprehensible. Sometimes I catch myself staring up at the night sky, wondering if whoever or whatever was behind that sphere is up there, watching and waiting. Will they return? Will we see more unexplained phenomena? Or was this a once-in-a-lifetime glimpse into the unknown? I don't have the answers, but I do know that I'll never look at the world quite the same way again. Because now I know that reality is far more complex and mysterious than we can possibly imagine. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the stars are bright, I swear I can see a faint green glow on the horizon. It's probably just my imagination. Probably. But maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder that there are still wonders in this world waiting to be discovered. And who knows? Maybe next time, that impossible green sphere won't disappear. Maybe next time it'll be the beginning of something far beyond our wildest dreams or our darkest nightmares. Our group of 12 students, plus our professor Dr. Chen, had traveled to a remote mountain village to help build a new schoolhouse. The locals were incredibly welcoming, but accommodations were sparse. We ended up staying in an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Not exactly the Ritz, but it had a roof and running water, so we were grateful. The first few days went by in a blur of manual labor and bonding with the villagers. By nightfall, we'd collapse into our sleeping bags, exhausted but fulfilled. It wasn't until our fourth night there that things took a turn for the bizarre. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I fumbled for my flashlight, I noticed a faint glow coming from down the hall. Curious, I crept out of the makeshift dorm room where we all slept and followed the light to its source, the old factory cafeteria. The cafeteria was a big open room, probably 40 feet square, with a few old tables still scattered about. What I saw when I peered inside made my blood run cold. There, hovering about shoulder height, were 9 glowing squares of light. Each one was maybe a foot across and emitted a pale bluish-white radiance. But here's the really freaky part. They were moving. Rotating slowly in a clockwise direction, the squares drifted across the walls and floor in perfect formation. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. There were no windows in that room, no projectors or any other light source I could see. These things seemed to be floating in mid-air, defying all logic. My first instinct was to run, get the others, but I was mesmerized. I must have watched those ethereal squares dance across the room for a good 5 minutes before I snapped out of it. Heart pounding, I sprinted back to wake up Dr. Chen and my classmates. In retrospect, maybe I should have tried to document it somehow. Snap a picture or grab my phone to record video. But in that moment, all rational thought flew out the window. I was consumed by an overwhelming need to not be alone with whatever those things were. I burst into our sleeping area, frantically shaking people awake. "Guys, you have to come see this," I hissed urgently. "There's something in the cafeteria, these glowing squares. I've never seen anything like it." Groggy and annoyed at being woken up, most of the group reluctantly followed me back to the cafeteria. Dr. Chen grabbed a flashlight, clearly skeptical of my wild claims. But as we filed into the room, an eerie hush fell over everyone. The squares were still there, continuing their mystifying rotation. "What the hell?" muttered Jake, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. "Is this some kind of prank?" demanded Allison. "Did you set this up somehow?" I shook my head emphatically. "No way. I just found them like this. I have no idea what they are or where they came from." Dr. Chen swept his flashlight beam across the room, searching for any hidden projectors or light sources. But the squares seemed unaffected, maintaining their steady glow and movement. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Chen said slowly, his scientific mind clearly struggling to make sense of the scene before us. "I've never encountered any natural phenomenon that could explain this." We all stood there transfixed for several long minutes, watching the hypnotic rotation of those ghostly squares. An atmosphere of unease settled over the group as the impossibility of what we were witnessing sank in. Eventually, Dr. Chen suggested we try to interact with or disrupt the lights somehow. Jake tentatively reached out to touch one as it passed by, but his hand went right through it with no resistance. The square didn't react at all, just continued on its path. Allison tried, waving her arms to block the beams, but again there was no effect. It was as if these things existed on some other plane of reality, visible but untouchable. After about 20 minutes of observation and failed attempts at interaction, Dr. Chen decided we should leave the room and regroup. As we filed out, I noticed Emma lingering behind, still staring at the lights with an odd expression. "Emma, you coming?" I called. She gave a little start as if coming out of a trance, then hurried to join us. Back in our sleeping area, we tried to make sense of what we'd just experienced. That's when things got even weirder. As we compared notes, it became clear that we hadn't all seen the same thing. "Wait, "What do you mean 9 squares?" asked Chris. "I only saw 4 of them." "4? There were definitely at least 6, argued May. "You guys are all crazy," Jake chimed in. "It was just one long horizontal bar of light moving around the room." A heated debate broke out as we realized everyone seemed to have perceived the lights differently. Some saw squares, others saw circles or triangles. The number ranged from just one shape up to a dozen. Even the color wasn't consistent. While most agreed on a bluish-white glow, a few people described it as more of a pale green or yellow. Dr. Chen listened to all our conflicting accounts with growing bewilderment. "This is unprecedented," he muttered, scribbling furiously in a notebook. "Some kind of mass hallucination, perhaps? But what could have triggered it?" We tossed around theories late into the night. Someone suggested it might be related to the high altitude messing with our perception. Another wondered if we'd all been exposed to some weird toxin or gas left over in the old factory. But none of the explanations felt satisfactory. Dawn was breaking by the time we all finally drifted off to sleep. When we woke a few hours later, the obvious first move was to go check out the cafeteria again. But in the harsh light of day, there was no trace of the mysterious lights. The room looked completely ordinary, just a dusty old cafeteria with some broken tables and chairs. We spent that whole day distracted, eagerly waiting for nightfall so we could see if the phenomenon would repeat. But when darkness came, the cafeteria remained stubbornly empty and lightless. We took turns keeping watch all night, but the glowing shapes never reappeared. The next day, we reluctantly packed up to head home as our trip came to an end. As much as we all wanted to stay and investigate further, we had flights to catch and classes to get back to. Dr. Chen promised he would reach out to some colleagues to see if they had any insights into what we might have experienced. In the years since, I've replayed that night in my mind countless times. I've researched every kind of atmospheric phenomenon, optical illusion, and paranormal occurrence I could find. But I've never come across anything that matches what we saw in that abandoned factory cafeteria. Sometimes I wonder if it was all just an incredibly vivid shared dream. But then I'll catch up with one of my old classmates from the trip, and the conversation inevitably turns to those mysterious lights. The memory is still so clear, so viscerally real for all of us. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night. Part of me hopes that one day I'll find a rational explanation that makes sense of it all. But another part of me is oddly comforted by the mystery. It's a reminder that the world still holds secrets and wonders beyond our current understanding. All I know for certain is that for one brief, magical night, I glimpsed something truly inexplicable. Those 9 glowing squares, dancing their ethereal waltz across an empty room, opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered before. Whatever they were, they left an indelible mark on my perception of reality. So I continue to search for answers, knowing I may never find them. But I'll always be grateful for that brush with the unknown, that moment when the veil of the ordinary world lifted just a bit, offering a tantalizing glimpse of something more. I was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old when it happened. It was one of those lazy summer afternoons in the Midwest, the kind where the air is thick and heavy and time seems to slow to a crawl. My cousin Jake and I were in the back seat of my mom's old station wagon, driving back from my grandparents' farm about an hour outside of town. We were bored out of our minds, as kids tend to be on long car rides, idly watching the endless cornfields and occasional farmhouse roll by outside the windows. I remember Jake had just finished telling some dumb joke that had us both giggling when suddenly he went quiet and his eyes got real wide. He was staring intently out the rear window of the car. I twisted around in my seat to see what he was looking at, and that's when I saw it too. At first, I thought it was just a weird cloud formation or something, but as I kept looking, I realized it was way too big and solid to be a cloud. It was this massive black triangle, like something out of a sci-fi movie, just hanging there in the sky behind us. The thing must have been the size of a football field at least. I'd never seen anything like it before. "Mom!" I yelled, my voice cracking with excitement and fear. "Mom, look, what is that thing?" But she just glanced in the rearview mirror and said, "What thing, honey? I don't see anything unusual." Jake and I kept staring out the back window, completely transfixed. The triangle was moving now, descending slowly towards the ground at an angle. It looked like it was going to crash into the trees lining the road about a half-mile behind us. "It's falling!" Jake shouted. "It's gonna crash!" We watched in stunned silence as the giant black shape disappeared behind the tree line. For a split second, there was nothing. Then a bright green flash lit up the sky, so vivid it left spots dancing in my vision. "Did you see that?" I yelled to my mom. "The green light? Something crashed back there." But she just sighed and said, "Boys, I think you're letting your imaginations run wild. There's nothing back there but trees and farmland." Jake and I exchanged bewildered looks. How could she not have seen it? It was right there, plain as day. We begged her to turn around and go back to investigate, but she refused, saying we were already running late and needed to get home. The rest of the drive passed in a daze. Jake and I kept craning our necks to look out the back window, hoping to catch another glimpse of whatever it was we'd seen. But there was nothing, just the same old trees and fields and cloudy summer sky. When we got home, we immediately tried to tell my dad and older sister about what we'd seen, but they just laughed it off, saying we must have dozed off and had some kind of shared dream. No matter how much we insisted it was real, no one would believe us. That night, I barely slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that massive black triangle descending from the sky. I kept replaying the green flash over and over in my mind, wondering what it could have been. A crash, an explosion, some kind of weird alien technology. The possibilities were endless and terrifying. The next morning, Jake and I convinced my dad to drive us out to where we thought we'd seen the crash. We scoured the area for hours, looking for any sign of wreckage or strange markings. But we found nothing out of the ordinary, just the same old cornfields and patches of woods we'd seen 100 times before. Over the next few weeks, we checked the local newspapers religiously, hoping to find some mention of a UFO sighting or an unexplained incident in the area. But there was nothing. It was like the whole thing had never happened. As time went on, Jake and I talked about it less and less. I think we both started to doubt our own memories. Maybe it really had just been some kind of shared hallucination or vivid daydream. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. That massive black triangle and eerie green flash were burned into my brain forever. Years passed, and life went on. I grew up, went to college, got a job. But I never forgot about that strange summer afternoon. Sometimes I'd bring it up to Jake when we got together for family gatherings, but he'd just get a faraway look in his eyes and change the subject. I think the whole thing disturbed him even more than it did me. I became somewhat obsessed with UFO sightings and unexplained phenomena. I'd spend hours online, reading eyewitness accounts and looking at blurry photos, hoping to find something that matched what Jake and I had seen. But nothing ever came close to the sheer size and otherworldliness of that black triangle. About 15 years after the incident, I stumbled across an obscure online forum dedicated to Black Triangle UFO sightings. As I scrolled through the posts, my heart started racing. Some of the descriptions were eerily similar to what Jake and I had witnessed. Massive, silent, triangular craft moving at impossible speeds and performing maneuvers that defied the laws of physics. I created an account and shared my story, leaving out any identifying details. Within hours, my inbox was flooded with responses. Some people shared similar experiences, while others offered wild theories about government conspiracies and alien technology. It was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting to know I wasn't alone. One response in particular caught my attention. It was from a user claiming to be a former Air Force pilot who had encountered a similar craft during a training exercise in the 90s. He described the same green flash we'd seen, saying it seemed to be some kind of propulsion system unlike anything known to modern science. I spent weeks corresponding with this person, exchanging theories and comparing notes. They seemed credible, providing details about their military service that checked out when I looked into them. But just as I felt like I was getting close to some answers, they suddenly stopped responding to my messages. Their account was deleted shortly after. This only deepened the mystery for me. Was there some kind of cover-up going on? Had this person been silenced for sharing classified information? The more I dug, the more questions I had. I tried to talk to Jake about it again, hoping the online forum might rekindle his interest in what we'd seen. But he just shook his head and told me to let it go. "We were just kids," he said. "Kids see all kinds of crazy stuff that isn't real." But I couldn't let it go. That day had changed something fundamental in me. It had opened my eyes to the possibility that there were things in this world, or beyond it, that defied explanation. Things that most people would rather ignore or explain away than confront. I've spent countless hours over the years trying to make sense of what Jake and I saw that day. Was it really some kind of advanced aircraft, maybe a top-secret military project? Or was it something truly otherworldly, a glimpse of technology far beyond our understanding? Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy for still obsessing over this after all these years. Maybe Jake is right, and it was just some kind of shared delusion. But then I close my eyes, and I can still see that massive black shape blocking out the sky, still feel the hair on my arms standing up as that green flash lit up the world for a split second. Whatever it was real. And somewhere out there, I know there are answers. I just have to keep looking. To this day, every time I'm driving down a lonely stretch of highway, I find myself scanning the skies. Part of me hopes I'll never see anything like that again. But another part, the part that's still that wide-eyed kid in the back seat of his mom's station wagon, is secretly hoping for one more glimpse of the impossible. I'll never forget that sunny afternoon in May 1995. It was one of those perfect spring days. Clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, birds chirping. I was 17 years old at the time, just a normal high school kid hanging out in my backyard, lounging in a lawn chair and soaking up the warm sunshine. I've always been a pretty logical, rational person. I didn't believe in ghosts or aliens or any of that supernatural stuff. But what I saw that day shook my worldview to its core. And even now, decades later, I still can't explain it. I was just sitting there, eyes closed, face tilted up towards the sun, when something made me open my eyes and look up at the sky. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just endless blue with a few wispy clouds. but then a glint of light caught my eye. At first I thought it was just the sun reflecting off an airplane, but as I focused on it, I realized this was like no aircraft I'd ever seen before. It was a brilliant point of light, almost painfully bright to look at directly, and it wasn't moving in a straight line like a plane or helicopter would. I sat up straighter in my chair, squinting at this strange light. It seemed to be moving in odd patterns, darting this way and that. I remember thinking it looked almost playful, like a firefly dancing through the air. But this was broad daylight, and whatever it was had to be pretty high up to appear so small. Suddenly the light shot straight down in a vertical dive. My heart leapt into my throat. I was sure I was about to witness some kind of crash or explosion, but just before it would have hit the ground, it made an absolutely impossible maneuver. In the blink of an eye, that streak of light pulled up into a perfect U-turn. There was no gradual curve, no arc. It was moving straight down 1 second, and the next it was shooting straight back up into the sky. The laws of physics say that's not possible. The G-forces alone should have obliterated anything making a turn that sharp at that speed. I jumped to my feet, my mouth hanging open in disbelief. The light accelerated straight up, much faster than it had been moving before. Within seconds it had vanished into a small cloud. I stood there frozen, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. The whole incident couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds. But in that brief moment, everything I thought I knew about reality had been turned upside down. I ran inside to tell my parents, but of course they didn't believe me. "You probably just saw a reflection off an airplane," my dad said dismissively. But I knew with absolute certainty that this was no airplane. No known aircraft could move like that. Over the next few days, I scoured the local newspaper and listened intently to the news, sure that others must have seen it too. But there was nothing, not a single report of any unusual sightings. I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. But the memory was so vivid, so real. I knew deep in my bones that I had witnessed something extraordinary. I became a bit obsessed after that. I spent hours online reading about UFO sightings and unexplained aerial phenomena. I joined message boards and chat rooms dedicated to the topic. But nothing I found quite matched what I had seen. Most reported UFOs were described as metallic craft or strange shapes. What I saw was just pure light, blindingly bright and able to move in ways that defied the laws of physics. The closest accounts I could find were reports of so-called orbs, spheres of light that supposedly dart around the sky. But even those didn't seem to capture the impossible maneuvers I had witnessed. As the years went by, I mostly kept the incident to myself. I learned pretty quickly that most people react with either disbelief or mockery when you start talking about UFOs. I didn't want to be labeled as some kook or conspiracy theorist, but I never stopped wondering about it. Every time I look up at the sky, especially on clear, sunny days, I find myself searching for that elusive point of light. I've never seen anything like it again, but the memory of that day is seared into my mind. I've run through every possible explanation I can think of. Could it have been some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, like ball lightning? But from everything I've read, ball lightning doesn't behave anything like what I saw. A secret military aircraft. But surely we don't have technology capable of those kinds of maneuvers, even decades later. The rational part of my brain keeps insisting there must be some logical explanation. Maybe some trick of the light, a flaw in my perception, or a fault in my memory. But another part of me knows, with unshakable certainty, that what I saw was real. And if it was real, then it means there are things in this universe far beyond our current understanding. I'm not saying it was aliens. I'm not saying it was anything supernatural. I honestly don't know what it was. And that's what haunts me the most, the not knowing. It's like having a splinter in your mind that you can never quite dig out. Sometimes I wonder how different my life might have been if I hadn't looked up at that exact moment. Would I have gone on in blissful ignorance, never questioning the nature of reality? Or was I somehow meant to see it? Was it a message or a sign of some kind? I know how crazy that sounds. Trust me, I've spent years grappling with these thoughts, trying to make sense of an experience that fundamentally doesn't make sense. I've gone through phases of doubt, convinced I must have imagined or misremembered it. But then the memory comes flooding back, as crisp and clear as the day it happened, and I'm right back there in that moment of awe and disbelief. I've only told a handful of people about this over the years. Most react with polite skepticism at best. My wife believes that I believe I saw something, but I can tell she thinks I must have been mistaken somehow. I don't blame her. I probably wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But recently I came across a news article that made my blood run cold. It described a U.S. Navy video showing an unidentified aerial phenomenon performing impossible maneuvers, including an instantaneous reversal of direction, much like what I saw. For the first time in decades, I felt a glimmer of validation. Maybe I wasn't crazy after all. I don't know if I'll ever get answers about what I saw that day. Part of me still hopes that someday I'll see it again, or that some scientific breakthrough will finally offer an explanation. But another part of me has made peace with the mystery. Perhaps some things in this vast universe are simply beyond our comprehension. All I know for certain is this. On a sunny afternoon in May 1995, I saw something incredible. In the span of 10 seconds, my entire worldview was shattered and reassembled. And while my rational mind still struggles to accept it, my heart knows the truth. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. I've seen proof of that with my own eyes. It was a warm summer evening in my small Midwestern town. I remember feeling restless, unable to sleep despite the late hour. The digital clock on my nightstand read 1:37 a.m. as I tossed and turned in bed. Frustrated, I decided to get up and get a glass of water from the kitchen. As I padded down the hallway, careful not to wake my parents, I noticed an eerie glow coming through the living room windows. At first I thought it might be headlights from a passing car, but the light seemed too steady, too uniform. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept towards the window, peering out into the night. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, hovering silently above the cornfield behind our house, was an enormous rectangular object. It had to be at least 300 feet long, maybe even 500 feet. The surface wasn't smooth like I would have expected from an aircraft or blimp. Instead, it was covered in intricate patterns and protrusions, almost like the surface of a Star Wars spaceship. Soft lights pulsed along its edges in mesmerizing patterns. I stood there frozen, my mind reeling as I tried to process what I was seeing. This was no conventional aircraft. It was utterly alien and impossibly massive. Yet it floated there, silent and still, defying all laws of physics. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out more details. The object was a dark gunmetal gray color, with sections that seemed to shimmer and shift as if they weren't quite solid. Along the edges I could see strange symbols or markings etched into the surface. They looked almost like circuitry or alien writing. Suddenly, without warning, a beam of bluish-white light shot out from the craft, sweeping across our yard. I ducked down instinctively, heart pounding. When I peeked back up, the beam was gone. But now the craft seemed to be slowly rotating, and I realized with a jolt that it was orienting itself towards our house, towards me. Panic gripped me, and I stumbled backwards, knocking over a lamp in my haste. The crash seemed deafening in the silence of the night. I scrambled to pick it up, praying I hadn't woken my parents. The last thing I wanted was for them to come investigate and see this impossible thing outside. When I looked back out the window, the craft had stopped rotating. It was now perfectly aligned with our house, its featureless front face pointed directly at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Somehow, I knew it was aware of me, watching me. For several long moments, we regarded each other in silence. Me, a frightened teenager, and this colossal visitor from who knows where. I was torn between terror and fascination. Part of me wanted to run and hide under my bed, but another part of me couldn't look away, desperate to understand what I was seeing. Just as I was working up the courage to maybe try taking a picture with my phone, the craft began to move. Slowly at first, then picking up speed, it started to glide forwards. There was no sound, no rush of wind, nothing to indicate something so massive was in motion. It was as if the laws of physics simply didn't apply. I watched in awe as it passed overhead, marveling at its impossible size. From this angle I could see that the bottom was not flat, but covered in all sorts of strange protrusions and recesses. Pulsing lights traced patterns across the surface that made my eyes hurt to look at directly. As it cleared our property, the craft began to ascend, picking up speed. Within moments it was high above the trees, a dark shape against the starry sky. I blinked, and suddenly it was gone, vanished without a trace. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sky where it had been. Part of me wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew deep down that it had been real. Too real. Eventually, I managed to shake myself out of my daze and crept back to my room. Sleep was impossible now. I lay awake for hours, reliving those incredible moments over and over in my mind. What was that thing? Where had it come from? And why had it come here, to our quiet little town in the middle of nowhere? When morning finally came, I was exhausted but wired. I practically ran downstairs, eager to see if there was any evidence of last night's visitor. But the yard looked completely normal. No strange marks, no flattened grass, nothing out of place at all. I tried to tell my parents what I'd seen, but they just exchanged worried looks and told me it must have been a vivid dream. I could see they didn't believe me. How could they? It sounded insane even to my own ears. Over the next few weeks, I scoured the local news and internet forums, desperate for any confirmation of what I'd seen. But there was nothing. No reports of strange lights, no blurry photos, not even the usual crackpot UFO sightings. It was as if the craft had appeared for me and me alone. As time passed, I started to doubt myself. Had it really happened? Or was it just some incredibly vivid hallucination brought on by lack of sleep? But every time I started to convince myself it wasn't real, I'd close my eyes and see that massive shape hovering silently above our yard, its inscrutable surface shimmering in the moonlight. The memory was too visceral, too detailed to be just a dream. I'm older now, but I've never forgotten that night. I've never seen anything like it again, despite spending countless nights stargazing and hoping for a repeat encounter. Sometimes I wonder if it was some kind of test or message meant just for me. Other times, I think maybe I witnessed something I was never meant to see, a glimpse behind a curtain of reality. I don't know if I'll ever have answers, but I know what I saw that night was real. And I know that somewhere out there, far beyond our understanding, there are things that defy explanation, things that can appear and vanish without a trace, bending the very fabric of reality around them. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and still, I find myself drawn to that same living room window. I stand there in the darkness, peering out at the starry sky, and I wonder if somewhere out there that strange visitor is still gliding silently through the night. And I wonder if someday, somehow, our paths might cross again. Until then, all I can do is remember and wonder and hope that someday I'll understand the truth of what I witnessed on that incredible summer night so long ago. I was working as a radio operator in a remote outpost in Alaska back in the 70s. It was a lonely job, just me and my assistant Jim, an Inuit local, manning the station for months at a time. We'd relay weather reports, coordinate supply drops, and keep an ear out for any emergencies in the vast wilderness around us. One night in the dead of winter, I was doing my usual rounds, checking equipment and scanning frequencies. It was around 2 a.m., pitch black outside except for the shimmering aurora borealis painting the sky in ethereal greens. I always loved those quiet night shifts, feeling like I was the only person awake for hundreds of miles. As I was adjusting one of the antenna arrays, something caught my eye through the window. At first I thought it was just a particularly bright star, but then I realized it was moving. I grabbed my binoculars for a better look. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a glowing blue orb, about the size of a beach ball, zigzagging across the sky at impossible speeds. 1 second it would be near the horizon, the next it would shoot straight up, then veer off at a sharp angle. The movements were unlike anything I'd ever seen. No aircraft could maneuver like that. I watched, transfixed for several minutes as it danced through the sky. Its glow pulsed slightly, giving it an almost alive quality. At times it seemed to pause and hover in place before zipping off again. Suddenly I remembered Jim was out doing a perimeter check. I grabbed the radio to call him in. He had to see this. "Jim, come in. You've got to get back to the station right now. There's something you need to see." His gruff voice crackled back. "On my way. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just hurry." A few minutes later I heard the crunch of his boots on snow as he approached. I waved him inside urgently. "Quick, look!" I pointed out the window. The orb was still there, now tracing wide arcs near the tree line. Jim came up beside me, his broad face impassive as always. I handed him the binoculars. "You see it? That blue light, what do you think it is?" He peered through the lenses for a long moment. I waited for his reaction, some sign of shock or awe. But his expression never changed. Without a word, he handed the binoculars back to me and walked away. I heard him go into his small sleeping quarters and shut the door. "Jim," I called after him, confused, "don't you want to keep watching?" No response. I couldn't understand his lack of reaction. Didn't he realize how incredible this was? I turned back to the window, determined to observe as long as I could. The orb continued its bizarre flight path, which I now realized seemed to follow a pattern. It wasn't random at all, but tracing invisible lines in the sky. It hit me suddenly. The movements corresponded to the Earth's magnetic field lines. I'd seen diagrams of them in science books, and the orb's path matched perfectly. But how was that possible? What kind of object could detect and travel along magnetic fields? My mind raced with possibilities. Was it some kind of top-secret military craft? An atmospheric phenomenon we'd never documented before? Or something truly otherworldly? I grabbed my logbook and started frantically sketching and taking notes, trying to capture every detail. The exact shade of blue, the way it pulsed, the precise patterns it followed. I noted the time, temperature, wind conditions, anything that might help explain what I was seeing. Hours passed, and I remained glued to the window. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, the orb suddenly shot straight up at incredible speed, vanishing into the upper atmosphere in seconds. I blinked, wondering if I'd imagined it all. But my pages of notes confirmed what I'd seen. I'd been witness to something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. Exhausted but exhilarated, I went to wake Jim. I figured now that he'd had some time to process, he'd want to discuss what we'd seen. But when I opened his door, the room was empty. His bed was made, looking like it hadn't been slept in. "Jim," I called out, checking the bathroom and supply closet. No sign of him anywhere in the small station. I went outside, my breath frosting in the frigid morning air. His snowmobile was still parked where he'd left it the night before. There were no fresh tracks in the snow. It was like he'd simply vanished. I spent the next several hours searching the area and trying to raise him on the radio, growing increasingly panicked. He knew better than to go off alone without telling me. And where could he have gone on foot in this wilderness? As the day wore on with no sign of Jim, I had to make the call to HQ to report him missing. Search parties were sent out, but found nothing. It was as if he'd disappeared into thin air. In the following days and weeks, as the search continued, I was questioned extensively about what had happened. I told them everything about the orb, Jim's strange reaction, his disappearance. They were skeptical, to say the least. There was talk of altitude sickness, hallucinations from isolation. Some even suggested I'd done something to Jim myself, but I knew what I'd seen. Those hours of watching that impossible object move through the sky were burned into my memory. I became obsessed with researching similar sightings, with understanding the science behind what I'd witnessed. Months passed, and still no trace of Jim was ever found. Eventually, I was transferred to another post. They said it was a routine rotation, but I knew they wanted me away from there. To this day, I've never seen anything like that orb again. I've gone over that night in my head countless times, wondering what really happened. Was there a connection between the orb and Jim's disappearance? Did he know something about it that scared him into running? Or was it all just a string of unrelated coincidences? I don't expect I'll ever know for sure, but I do know that what I saw that night was real. Something visited us in that remote Alaskan outpost, something that challenges everything we think we understand about our world. And somehow I was lucky, or cursed, enough to witness it. Sometimes I still dream about that pulsing blue light. I see it tracing those invisible paths in the sky, defying physics and reason. And I wonder, is it still out there somewhere? Are there others like it? And will we ever truly comprehend what it was and where it came from? All I know is that night changed me forever. It opened my eyes to possibilities I'd never considered before. And it left me with questions that I fear will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was just past midnight on a Tuesday in late October. I'd run out of cigarettes and was craving one badly after a stressful day at work. The nearest convenience store was about a 10-minute walk, and I debated whether to go out so late. But my craving won out, so I threw on a light jacket and headed out into the chilly night air. The streets were deserted at that hour. Nakameguro is usually a lively area, but everything was closed and eerily quiet. The only sounds were my footsteps echoing off the buildings and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. To get to the convenience store, I had to cut through a small neighborhood park. During the day, it was a cheerful place where kids played and couples strolled. But at night, the empty playground equipment cast strange shadows, and the trees seemed to loom ominously. As I entered the park, a shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like I was being watched. I quickened my pace, eager to get through as quickly as possible. That's when I heard it, a child's voice, faint but clear. "Help me." I froze, my heart pounding. It had to be my imagination, right? But then I heard it again. "Please, help me." It seemed to be coming from the far corner of the park. Against my better judgment, I slowly walked in that direction, straining my eyes in the dim light. As I got closer, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a small memorial site with flowers, stuffed animals, and children's drawings. A chill ran through me as I realized this must be the site of some tragedy involving a child. But before I could contemplate it further, I heard the creaking of metal behind me. I spun around to see one of the swings moving back and forth on its own. There was no wind, no possible explanation for its movement. And then, clear as day, I heard a child giggle. Terror gripped me. I turned and ran as fast as I could out of the park, not stopping until I reached the brightly lit convenience store. I was shaking so badly I could barely light my cigarette. I chain-smoked 3 in a row, trying to calm my nerves before heading back. I took the long way home, avoiding the park entirely. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door and collapsed into bed, eventually falling into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I convinced myself it had all been my overactive imagination. Maybe I'd been half asleep and dreamed the whole thing. But as I opened my front door to leave for work, my blood ran cold. There, leading right up to my doorstep, was a trail of small, muddy footprints, child-sized footprints. I slammed the door shut and called in sick to work. My mind was reeling. How was this possible? Had some spirit from the park followed me home? I spent the day researching the history of the area, and what I found chilled me to the bone. 5 years earlier, 2 young children had drowned in the river near the park. Their bodies were found days later near the spot where I'd seen the memorial. That was it for me. I couldn't stay in that apartment another night. I packed up my essential belongings and went to stay with a friend. Within a week, I'd found a new place in a different neighborhood. To this day, I avoid that park in Nakameguro. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember those muddy footprints and the sound of that child's laughter, and I know it was real. I don't know if it was the ghost of one of those drowned children or some other wandering spirit, but whatever it was, it tried to follow me home that night. And I'm grateful I got out when I did, before it could attach itself to me permanently. I still live in Tokyo, but I never walk through parks at night anymore. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear the faint creak of a swing, accompanied by a child's ghostly giggle. It always makes me pull the covers up tight and pray for morning to come quickly. From the moment I moved in, something felt off about the place. The first time I walked through the front door with my suitcases, I felt this weird sensation, like invisible cobwebs brushing against my face. I brushed it off as dust or my imagination, but it happened every single time I entered the apartment after that. No matter how many times I cleaned or checked for actual cobwebs, the feeling persisted. The walls were paper thin, and I could hear everything my neighbors did. But it wasn't just normal apartment noises. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear what sounded like a woman softly crying or whispering, even though the apartment next door was vacant. I tried to rationalize it as pipes or the wind, but deep down I knew it was something else. Things escalated quickly after I'd been there about a month. I started waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was watching me. I'd open my eyes and swear I saw a dark figure standing in the corner of my bedroom, but it would vanish as soon as I turned on the light. This happened night after night, leaving me exhausted and on edge. I didn't want to seem crazy, so I kept quiet about the strange occurrences. But after a particularly bad week of sleepless nights and constant unease, I decided to invite some coworkers over for drinks, hoping their presence would make me feel better about the place. As we were hanging out in the living room, my friend Kenji suddenly went pale and started staring fixedly at a spot near the front door. When I asked what was wrong, he hesitated before saying, I think I see a woman hanging there. My blood ran cold. I couldn't see anything, but Kenji described a woman in her 30s with long black hair, suspended from the ceiling. He said she looked sad and lost. The others couldn't see her either, but the mood instantly changed, and everyone made excuses to leave shortly after. Once I was alone again, the apartment felt more oppressive than ever. I could almost feel a heaviness in the air, like some dark presence was pressing down on me. That night, I barely slept at all. Every creak and shadow seemed sinister. The next morning, I worked up the courage to ask my landlord if anyone had died in the apartment. He got shifty and evasive, but eventually admitted that a woman had committed suicide there about 5 years ago. Apparently, she hanged herself near the front door, exactly where Kenji had seen the apparition. After that, things got even worse. Objects would move on their own when I wasn't looking. Doors would slam shut for no reason. The sensation of cobwebs on my face became almost constant. I'd wake up with unexplained scratches on my arms and legs. One night I jolted awake to see the dark figure looming over my bed. This time I could make out the features of a woman with long black hair, her face contorted in anguish. I screamed and she vanished, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I spent that night in a capsule hotel and started frantically searching for a new apartment the next day. It wasn't easy to break my lease, but I didn't care. I was willing to pay any price to get out of there. As I was packing up my belongings, the paranormal activity reached a fever pitch. Things were flying off shelves, doors slamming repeatedly, and that awful cobweb sensation was all over my body. It felt like the spirit was angry that I was leaving. I'll never forget my final moments in that cursed apartment. As I was about to walk out the door for the last time, I felt an ice-cold hand grab my wrist. I yanked away and ran out, slamming the door behind me. As I stood in the hallway catching my breath, I heard a woman's scream of anguish from inside the empty apartment. I left the key with the landlord and never looked back. To this day, I shudder when I think about that place and what might have happened if I'd stayed any longer. I still have nightmares about the woman's face and wake up with the feeling of cobwebs on my skin. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know that what I experienced in that Nakamaguro apartment was real and terrifying. Sometimes I wonder if another unsuspecting tenant has moved in, oblivious to the horrors that await them. Part of me wants to warn people, but who would believe such an outlandish story? All I know is that I'll never again ignore my instincts when a place feels off. Some things just can't be explained rationally, and some places are better left undisturbed. I'm sharing this as a warning to others. If you ever experience anything like what I went through, don't wait. Get out while you still can. I've since found a new apartment in a different part of Tokyo. It's smaller and more expensive, but blessedly free of any supernatural presence. Still, I'm always a little uneasy when I come home at night. I find myself hesitating before opening the front door, half expecting to feel those phantom cobwebs brush across my face. So far, it hasn't happened, and I pray it never will again. The first few weeks were uneventful. Sure, it was a bit eerie being the only one in the store during the dead of night, with just the occasional drunk stumbling in for cigarettes or a late-night trucker grabbing coffee. But I got used to the quiet and the soft hum of the refrigerators. It was on a particularly slow Tuesday night when things started to get weird. The clock had just struck 2 a.m., and I was restocking the chips aisle when I heard the electronic chime of the door opening. I called out the usual "Welcome to Quick Stop," but got no response. Figuring it was just another silent customer, I continued my work. A few minutes later, I felt a chill run down my spine. You know that feeling when you just know someone's watching you? Yeah, it was like that, but 100 times worse. I slowly turned around, and there he was, an old man, probably in his 70s, standing at the end of the aisle. He was wearing an outdated suit that looked like it was from the 1950s, and his skin was so pale it was almost translucent. I managed to stammer out, "Can I help you find anything, sir?" But he just stared at me with these glassy, unfocused eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and walked towards the drink coolers. I followed him, trying to shake off the unease that was growing in my gut. When I rounded the corner to the cooler aisle, he was gone. Just vanished. I checked every aisle, the bathroom, even outside, but there was no sign of him. The door chime never rang, and I hadn't heard the bell over the back emergency exit. It was as if he'd disappeared into thin air. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe he'd slipped out when I wasn't looking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next night, I was on edge the entire shift. Every little noise made me jump. Around the same time, 2 a.m., the door chimed again. This time, it was a young woman who came in. She seemed normal enough, grabbing a few items and bringing them to the counter. As I rang her up, she frowned and held up a carton of milk. "Excuse me, but I think this milk has gone bad," she said. "The expiration date is still good, but it smells awful." I apologized and grabbed a fresh carton from the cooler. But when I opened it to check, the smell that wafted out nearly made me gag. It was definitely spoiled, despite the date showing it should be fresh for another week. The woman left, and I spent the next hour checking all the dairy products. Every single one was bad. I ended up having to throw out the entire stock. When I told my manager in the morning, he was furious and accused me of messing with the temperature settings on the coolers. But I knew I hadn't touched them. This pattern continued for the next few weeks. Every night around 2 a.m., something strange would happen. Sometimes it was the old man appearing and disappearing. Other times, customers would complain about spoiled food or drinks, even when I had just restocked with fresh products. One night, a trucker came in looking pale and shaken. He asked if he could use our phone because his cell had died. As he was making his call, I overheard him telling someone that he'd nearly hit a man who appeared out of nowhere on the road, right in front of the cemetery. The description he gave matched the old man I'd seen in the store. Things escalated from there. The electronics started acting up. The cash register would open on its own. The security cameras would glitch and show static at exactly 2 a.m. every night. One time, all the lights in the store flickered and went out for a full minute before coming back on. But the incident that finally broke me happened about a week ago. It was nearing the end of my shift, around 5 a.m., and I was exhausted from another night of paranormal activity. I was mopping the floor near the front of the store when I heard a sound behind me, like footsteps, but muffled, as if someone was walking through water. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, by the magazine rack, was the old man. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him were at least a dozen other figures, men, women, even a few children. They were all pale, with the same glassy eyes, dressed in clothes from different eras. And they were all staring right at me. I dropped the mop and backed away, my hands shaking so bad I could barely fumble for my phone. But before I could call anyone, they all vanished at once, leaving behind nothing but a bone-deep chill in the air and the lingering smell of damp earth. That was it for me. I called my manager right then and there and quit on the spot. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant fear, the feeling of being watched, the inexplicable events. It was too much. Since then, I've been trying to make sense of what happened. I've researched the history of the area and found out that the cemetery next door is one of the oldest in the town, with graves dating back to the early 1800s. Some of the outfits I saw on those ghostly figures matched the styles from those times. I've also learned that the convenience store was built on land that used to be part of the cemetery. During construction, they found and relocated several unmarked graves. It makes me wonder if we disturbed something or someone who wasn't ready to move on. I still drive by the quick stop sometimes, usually during the day. It looks so normal, so innocent, but I know the truth now. I know what lurks there when the sun goes down. And every time I pass by, I can't help but glance at the window, half expecting to see that old man staring back at me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to work another night shift again. The experience has changed me, opened my eyes to a world I never believed in before. All I know is that some places have secrets, and some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. And sometimes, the veil between our world and the next is thinner than we'd like to believe. So if you're ever driving down Route 16 and you see a little convenience store next to an old cemetery, keep driving. And whatever you do, don't stop in for a late-night snack. You never know who or what might be waiting for you inside. It was a typical dreary October evening. The rain had been coming down in sheets all day, and the forecast showed no signs of it letting up anytime soon. I arrived at the station for my overnight shift, not looking forward to navigating the slick tracks in these conditions. As I went through my usual pre-departure checklist, I noticed the platform was eerily empty. Usually there were at least a few stragglers catching the last train, but tonight it was just me and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. I shrugged it off. Maybe the weather had kept everyone home. At 11:45 p.m., right on schedule, I fired up the engine and prepared to leave the station. That's when things started to get weird. The signal light at the end of the platform, which should have been green for departure, was flickering erratically between red and green. I'd never seen anything like it before. I radioed dispatch to report the malfunctioning signal, but got only static in response. Great, communications were down too. Just what I needed on a night like this. I was debating whether to proceed or wait for the all clear when movement on the platform caught my eye. There, about halfway down, was a figure. It looked like a man in a long, dark coat, but something about him seemed off. His outline was blurry, as if he was slightly out of focus, and he was just standing there, perfectly still, staring directly at me. A chill ran down my spine. Where had he come from? The platform had been empty just moments ago. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, he was still there. Suddenly, the figure raised his arm and pointed urgently down the tracks. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear anything over the pounding rain. Was he trying to warn me about something? Against my better judgment, I opened the cabin door and leaned out. "Hello, sir? Is everything all right?" I called. The wind whipped my words away as soon as they left my mouth. The figure continued gesturing frantically, becoming more agitated, and then in the blink of an eye, he vanished. Just gone, like he'd never been there at all. I stood there for a moment, rain pelting my face, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to write it off as a trick of the light, or my tired mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something truly strange had just happened. Shaken, I climbed back into the cabin and tried to collect myself. The signal light was still malfunctioning, alternating red-green-red in a nauseating rhythm. I checked my watch, 11:55 p.m. I was now 10 minutes behind schedule. I reached for the radio again, determined to get through to dispatch. To my relief, this time I heard a voice crackle through. "Central Dispatch, go ahead. This is train 237, still at platform 3. We've got a malfunctioning signal and—" I hesitated, unsure how to explain what I'd seen. Some unusual activity on the platform, requesting permission to proceed with caution. There was a long pause before dispatch responded. "Negative 237. We're getting reports of heavy flooding along your route. Hold position until further notice." I acknowledged the order and settled in to wait. As the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. Who was that figure on the platform? What had he been trying to tell me? Around 1 a.m., the rain finally started to let up. Dispatch radioed that a maintenance crew had been dispatched to check the tracks before giving us the all-clear. I dozed fitfully in the cabin, jolting awake at every crackle of the radio. It was just after 3 a.m. when the maintenance supervisor's voice came through, tight with tension. "Central, this is Mike on the ground. You're not going to believe this." My ears perked up as I listened to his report. Apparently, the relentless rain had washed out a section of track about 2 miles from the station. Several of the wooden sleepers had been completely displaced, leaving a dangerous gap in the rails. If that train had left on schedule, at that speed— Mike's voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what he meant. It would have been a catastrophe. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as the realization sank in. If I had departed on time, if I hadn't been delayed by that malfunctioning signal and the mysterious figure, my train would have derailed. Dozens of lives, including my own, would have been lost. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale glow over the wet platform, I finally got clearance to proceed. The damaged section had been repaired, and all signals were functioning normally. But as I guided the train out of the station, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Who was that figure on the platform? How did he know about the danger ahead? I've racked my brain trying to come up with a logical explanation, but I always come up short. In all my years of driving trains, I've never experienced anything like that night. Some of my co-workers have tried to dismiss it as stress or an overactive imagination, but I know what I saw, and I can't shake the feeling that something or someone intervened to prevent a tragedy that rainy night. I still drive that same route, and every time I pass that section of track, I find myself scanning the platform for a glimpse of that mysterious figure. I've never seen him again, but the memory of that night remains vivid in my mind. Was it a ghost, a guardian angel, or just a series of fortunate coincidences? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but one thing's for sure, I'll never take a routine night shift for granted again, because you never know when the unexpected might just save your life. I never thought a camping trip would change my life, but that's exactly what happened last summer. I'm a systems engineer, and for months I'd been drowning in work stress and battling depression. Everything felt hopeless and overwhelming. On a whim, I decided to go solo camping in the mountains near my hometown, thinking some time alone in nature might help clear my head. As I hiked up the trail with my backpack, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Part of me was scared to be alone with my thoughts, but another part craved the solitude. I found a secluded spot to set up camp as the sun was setting. The air was crisp and pine-scented. I got a small fire going and heated up some instant noodles for dinner. As night fell, I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep, but my mind was racing. All the worries and negative thoughts I'd been trying to escape came flooding back. I tossed and turned for hours, feeling utterly alone and hopeless. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by a strange sensation. The air in the tent felt different, charged somehow. My heart started pounding as I realized I wasn't alone. There was a shadowy figure sitting near my feet. I scrambled to turn on my flashlight, terrified of what I might see, but nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me. Sitting there, calm as could be, was a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She wore a vibrant red kimono and had long black hair. Her skin seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. I was too shocked to speak. How had a child gotten into my tent? Where had she come from? There were no campsites or houses for miles. The girl tilted her head and studied me with piercing dark eyes. Then she spoke in a soft, musical voice. "Did you come here to die?" A chill ran through me at her words. How could she know the dark thoughts that had been plaguing me? I stammered out a denial, but she just smiled sadly. "It's okay," she said. "Many people come to these mountains when their spirits are heavy, but death is not the answer you seek." I felt exposed, like she could see right through me. Tears welled up in my eyes as the pain and despair I'd been carrying burst to the surface. To my surprise, the girl reached out and took my hand. Her touch was comforting, radiating a gentle warmth. "You are not alone," she said. "Your life has meaning, even if you can't see it right now. The darkness will pass." We sat in silence for a while as I cried, releasing all the pent-up emotions. The girl simply held my hand and listened without judgment. Her presence was incredibly soothing. After a while, she reached into her kimono and pulled out some colorful candy. "Here," she said, offering me a piece. "Sweets can lighten a heavy heart." I accepted the candy, marveling at how surreal this all felt. Here I was, a grown man being comforted by a mysterious child in the middle of the night. Yet somehow it didn't feel strange. There was an ancient wisdom in her eyes that belied her youthful appearance. As I sucked on the candy, memories of my childhood surfaced, happier times before adult responsibilities and pressures had weighed me down. On impulse, I started humming an old lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me. The girl's eyes lit up. "That's a beautiful song," she said. "Will you teach it to me?" So there in the tent, I found myself singing my grandmother's lullaby to this otherworldly child. Her voice joined mine, high and clear. As we sang together, I felt a spark of joy ignite in my chest, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. When the song ended, the girl smiled brightly. "Thank you for sharing that with me. Music has great power to heal the soul." She was right. I did feel lighter somehow, the oppressive despair lifting slightly. We talked for hours as the night wore on. The girl asked me about my life, my dreams, my fears. She listened intently to everything I said, offering gentle words of encouragement and wisdom beyond her years. As the sky began to lighten with dawn, I realized our time was coming to an end. Sure enough, the girl stood up and smoothed her kimono. "It's time for me to go now," she said. "But remember, you are stronger than you know. Your life has purpose. Don't give up." I wanted to beg her to stay, to tell me more about who she was and where she came from. But something told me not to question it. This encounter felt sacred somehow, beyond ordinary explanation. The girl bent down and kissed me softly on the forehead. A wave of peace washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. She smiled one last time, then simply faded away before my eyes. I blinked in disbelief. Had I dreamed the whole thing? But no, the wrapper from the candy was still there, along with the lingering scent of cherry blossoms. I crawled out of the tent into the misty mountain morning, feeling like I'd woken from a long nightmare. The world seemed brighter somehow, full of possibility. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. That encounter in the mountains became a turning point in my life. I can't fully explain what happened that night, but I know it was real. The memory of that girl and her words of wisdom stayed with me, giving me strength in dark moments. I sought help for my depression when I returned home. I made changes in my life, switching to a less stressful job, reconnecting with old friends, spending more time in nature. Slowly but surely, I found my way back to myself. Sometimes when I'm hiking in those mountains, I catch a glimpse of red out of the corner of my eye, or hear the faint sound of a child's laughter on the wind. I don't know if that mysterious girl was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely, but I do know that she saved my life that night, giving me the courage to keep living when I was ready to give up. I still hum that lullaby sometimes, remembering how it sounded with our voices joined together in the darkness, and I silently thank her, wherever she may be, for showing me that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. I must have eventually dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a woman's voice coming from outside. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I became more alert, I realized the voice was very real and very distressed. "Help me! Please, somebody help!" The voice was distant but clear, seeming to come from somewhere in our backyard. My heart started racing as I sat up in bed, straining my ears. Who could be out there at this hour? I glanced at the glowing numbers on my alarm clock, 3:07 a.m. The witching hour, as my older sister liked to call it. She was always going on about ghosts and demons being most active at 3 a.m. I tried to push those thoughts out of my mind as the cries for help continued. "Is anyone there? I need help." The woman's voice was getting more frantic now. I couldn't just ignore her. What if she was hurt? Cautiously, I crept out of bed and tiptoed to the window. The full moon cast an eerie glow over our overgrown backyard, but I couldn't see anyone out there, just shadows and silence, punctuated by the woman's increasingly desperate pleas. "Mom! Dad!" I called out, hoping my parents would hear and come investigate, but there was no response from their room down the hall. How could they not hear this? I ran to their bedroom door and knocked. "Mom! Dad! Wake up! There's someone outside!" Nothing, not even the sound of stirring or sheets rustling. It was like they were in a coma. Frustrated and scared, I went back to my room. The cries were getting louder now, as if the woman was moving closer to the house. I peered out the window again, my eyes darting back and forth. Still nothing visible, but her voice was definitely nearer. "Please, I'm hurt. I need help." She sounded like she was right below my window now. My breath caught in my throat as I heard footsteps on the grass. Slow, dragging footsteps, coming towards the house. I backed away from the window, my whole body trembling. This wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong. The footsteps stopped directly beneath my window. Then, impossibly, I heard them start to climb. It sounded like nails scraping against the siding of the house, getting higher and higher. I wanted to run, to scream, to hide under my bed, but I was frozen in place, unable to move or make a sound. The scratching, climbing noises reached my window, and then, to my absolute horror, a pale hand appeared on the windowsill. It wasn't a normal hand. The fingers were too long, joints bent at unnatural angles. The skin was a sickly grayish white, like a corpse. As I watched in paralyzed terror, another hand appeared. Then slowly, so slowly, a face began to rise into view. It was the face of a woman, but not like any woman I'd ever seen. Her skin was the same corpse gray as her hands, pulled taut over sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were pitch black, no whites visible at all, and seemed to draw in all the light around them. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, stretching inhumanly wide to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that this was no human woman asking for help. This was something else, something that wanted in. The creature's mouth began to move, and that same voice I'd heard calling for help now took on a different tone, lower, guttural, full of malice. "Let me in, child," it growled. "Invite me in." I found my voice then and let out a scream that felt like it was torn from the very depths of my soul. I screamed and screamed, unable to look away from those bottomless black eyes. The thing began to pull itself through the window, its body contorting in ways that defied physics. I caught glimpses of gray, mottled skin stretched over an emaciated frame, limbs too long and jointed in the wrong places. Just as it was about to fully enter my room, my bedroom door burst open. My parents rushed in, flipping on the lights. In that instant, the creature vanished. One moment it was there, its face inches from mine, and the next, nothing. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. My parents wrapped me in their arms, asking what was wrong, what had happened. But I couldn't speak. I just cried and cried until exhaustion finally took over, and I passed out. The next morning, my parents tried to convince me it had all been a nightmare, but I knew what I had seen and heard. The problem was, there was no evidence. No scratches on the side of the house, no footprints in the garden, nothing to prove that the thing had been real. As the years went by, I almost managed to convince myself that maybe it had been just a terrifyingly vivid dream. Almost. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a faint voice calling for help from outside. And I know, deep in my bones, that it's still out there, waiting, watching, hoping I'll make the mistake of inviting it in. I've never been able to explain what happened that night. Was it a ghost, a demon, some kind of interdimensional being? I don't know. But I do know that it was real, and that the memory of those black eyes and that grotesque face will haunt me for the rest of my days. I'm an adult now, with a family of my own. We live in a different house, in a different state. But I still sleep with my windows locked tight, no matter how hot it gets. And I've made sure my kids know to never ever open the window if they hear someone calling for help in the night. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is try to help someone who isn't really there at all. It was around 2 a.m., and the hospital was quiet as usual for that time of night. I was at the nurse's station with my colleague Jessica, catching up on some paperwork when we heard a nurse call button go off. We both looked up at the board, surprised to see it was coming from room 237, which was supposed to be empty. "That's weird," Jessica said, frowning. "Housekeeping cleared that room earlier. No one should be in there." I nodded, feeling a bit uneasy. "Maybe it's just a malfunction. I'll go check it out." Jessica offered to come with me, which I was grateful for. As we walked down the dimly lit hallway towards 237, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This particular wing of the hospital was rumored to be haunted. Not that I usually bought into that kind of thing. But in the middle of the night, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and our footsteps echoing on the linoleum, it was hard not to feel on edge. We reached the door to 237 and paused. Jessica looked at me and whispered, "Ready?" I took a deep breath and nodded. She slowly pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow from the hallway. At first glance, it appeared empty, just as it should be. The bed was made, machines turned off, everything in order. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed the privacy curtain around the bed was partially closed. "Hello," I called out softly. "Is anyone in here?" No response. Jessica flicked on the lights, making us both squint for a moment. As our vision cleared, I started to move towards the curtain to pull it back fully. That's when I saw it. A hand. An actual human hand, crawling out from under the curtain. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. The hand was a sickly, grayish-brown color, like old clay. Its movements were unnatural, fingers splayed and twitching as it inched across the floor. There was no arm attached, just a disembodied hand creeping towards us. I heard Jessica gasp beside me. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is that?" I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the horrifying sight. The hand continued its slow, jerky progress across the floor. As it emerged fully from behind the curtain, I could see that the wrist ended in a ragged stump, as if it had been violently torn from a body, but there was no blood, just that strange, earthen texture. Jessica grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to get out of here," she hissed. But before we could move, the hand suddenly stopped. Its fingers curled inward, like it was grasping at something invisible. Then, to my utter horror, it began to drag itself in our direction. That finally broke the spell of shock that had held us in place. We bolted from the room, slamming the door behind us. We ran all the way back to the nurse's station, gasping for breath and trembling. "What the hell was that?" I managed to choke out once I could speak again. Jessica shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it in my life." We debated what to do next. Should we call security? The police? Would anyone even believe us? As we were discussing our options, we heard footsteps approaching. We both tensed, but it was just Dr. Ramirez, the senior night shift physician. He must have seen the fear on our faces because he immediately asked what was wrong. We haltingly explained what we'd seen in room 237. I expected him to laugh it off or tell us we were imagining things, but to my surprise, he looked grave. "I've worked in this hospital for over 30 years," he said slowly, "and I've heard stories, seen things I can't explain. What you described, it's not the first time something like that has been reported here." He went on to tell us that the hospital was built on the site of an old Civil War field hospital. Over the years, there had been numerous accounts of strange occurrences, particularly in that wing. Ghostly figures, unexplained sounds, and yes, even reports of disembodied limbs. "But why a hand?" I asked, still struggling to make sense of it all. "And why did it look so earthy?" Dr. Ramirez sighed. "There's a theory among some of the older staff. They say that sometimes when a person is close to death, their spirit can manifest physically for a brief moment. Usually, it's in the form of the part of their body that's most connected to their unfinished business or strongest emotion." He paused, then continued. "As for the appearance, well, there's an old saying that we come from dust, and to dust we shall return. Perhaps what you saw was a soul caught between life and death, already beginning its return to the earth." I shivered at the thought. It was hard to reconcile the rational, scientific part of my mind with what I had witnessed, but I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. Dr. Ramirez insisted on checking room 237 himself, but by the time we worked up the courage to return, there was no sign of the hand. The room was exactly as it should be, empty and undisturbed. In the days that followed, Jessica and I tried to go about our duties as normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, peering nervously around corners, and avoiding room 237 whenever possible. I've always considered myself a logical person, not prone to flights of fancy, but that night shook my understanding of reality to its core. I still don't know how to explain what happened, whether it was truly a supernatural event, some kind of shared hallucination, or something else entirely. All I know is that I'll never forget the sight of that hand creeping across the floor, its fingers grasping at unseen forces. And every time I walk past room 237, I can't help but wonder, what unfinished business brought that soul back? And more chillingly, will it ever return to finish what it started? The experience has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what might lie beyond. I find myself more attuned to the stories patients tell about near-death experiences or strange occurrences in the hospital. Part of me wants to dismiss it all as the product of stress and an overactive imagination, but another part, the part that saw that hand with my own eyes, can't help but wonder what other mysteries might be lurking just beyond the veil of our everyday reality. I still work the night shift, but I'm never truly comfortable in the dark corridors anymore. Every shadow seems to hold the potential for something unexplainable. Every empty room feels like it might not be as empty as it appears. I've thought about leaving my job, finding somewhere else to work where I'm not constantly reminded of that night. But something keeps me here. Maybe it's a desire to understand, to see if I can make sense of what happened. Or maybe, deep down, there's a part of me that hopes to catch another glimpse of the impossible, to confirm that what I saw was real. Whatever the reason, I stay. I do my job, care for my patients, and try to keep an open mind about the mysteries of life and death. But I'll never forget that night, or the realization that there are some things in this world that defy explanation. And sometimes those things reach out to us, quite literally, from beyond the grave. I still can't believe what happened to me last weekend. It's been days, but I can't shake this eerie feeling. I keep replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of it all, but I just can't. It was a typical Saturday afternoon. My parents were out of town for a wedding, and my sister was at a sleepover with her friends. I had the whole house to myself, which was pretty cool at first. I spent most of the day playing video games and binge-watching my favorite shows on Netflix. As evening approached, I decided to order some pizza and settle in for a horror movie marathon. I know, probably not the smartest idea when you're home alone, but I've always been a fan of scary movies. I figured it would be even more thrilling to watch them in an empty house. I was about halfway through the second movie when I heard it. A soft thud coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was just the house settling or maybe a tree branch hitting the roof. But then I heard it again, louder this time. It sounded like something heavy being moved across the floor. My heart started racing. I paused the movie and listened intently. The house was dead silent for a moment, and then I heard it again. Scraping, like furniture being dragged across the hardwood floor. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the neighbors. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. Our nearest neighbors were too far away for me to hear anything from their house. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911 if needed, and slowly made my way upstairs. The sound seemed to be coming from my sister's room. As I approached her door, the noises stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was almost more unnerving than the sounds themselves. With shaking hands, I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, and pushed the door open. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. My sister's room had been completely rearranged. And when I say completely, I mean it looked nothing like it had that morning. Her bed, which was usually against the far wall, was now in the center of the room. Her dresser and desk had been stacked on top of each other in the corner. Even her posters and photos had been taken down and piled neatly on her nightstand. But the most chilling part, everything was perfectly arranged. This wasn't the work of a burglar or a prankster. It looked like someone had methodically reorganized the entire room with precise care. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind raced through possible explanations, but none of them made sense. How could this have happened? I had been downstairs the whole time, and I would have heard if someone had broken in. As I stood there, I felt a cold draft brush against my skin. I looked towards the window, thinking maybe it had been left open, but it was shut tight. That's when I noticed something that made my heart nearly stop. There were no footprints on the carpet. My sister's room had thick plush carpeting that always showed footprints. But aside from my own at the doorway, the carpet was pristine. It was as if the furniture had moved itself. I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Jake. "Dude, you need to come over right now," I said as soon as he picked up. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, probably hearing the panic in my voice. I tried to explain what had happened, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Just come over, please. Bring Mike and Chris if you can. I don't want to be alone right now." Jake must have sensed my fear because he agreed without further questions. While I waited for them to arrive, I paced around the living room, jumping at every little sound. I couldn't bring myself to go back upstairs. When my friends finally arrived, I practically yanked them inside. I led them upstairs, my hands shaking as I opened my sister's door again. The room was exactly as I had left it, completely rearranged. Jake, Mike, and Chris stood there, mouths agape, as they took in the scene. "What the hell?" Mike whispered. We spent the next hour examining every inch of the room, looking for any explanation. We checked the windows, the closet, even under the bed, but we found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no hidden passages, nothing that could explain how this had happened. "Maybe your sister came home and did this as a prank," Chris suggested, but I shook my head. "I've been home all day. Nobody's come in or out. Plus, look at the carpet. There are no footprints except ours." We all stared at the unmarked carpet, a chill running through the room. "Let's go back downstairs," Jake said finally. Nobody argued. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, none of us wanting to be alone. We tried to distract ourselves with video games and movies, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every creak of the house made us jump. When morning finally came, we went back upstairs to check the room again. To our shock, everything was back to normal. The bed was against the wall, the dresser and desk were in their usual spots, and the posters were back on the walls. It was as if nothing had ever happened. We stood there, staring at the room in disbelief. If it weren't for my friends being there, I would have thought I had imagined the whole thing. My parents and sister came home later that day. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought I had watched too many horror movies and let my imagination run wild. Even my friends who had seen the rearranged room with their own eyes started to doubt their memories. But I know what I saw. I know what we all saw. Something unexplainable happened in my house that night, and I still can't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Since then, I've been researching similar incidents, trying to find any explanation for what happened. I've read about poltergeists and other paranormal phenomena, but nothing quite matches what we experienced. I've also been paying close attention to my sister's room. Sometimes, when I pass by, I swear I can hear faint sounds coming from inside, like furniture being slowly dragged across the floor. But when I check, everything is always in its place. My sister says she hasn't noticed anything strange, but sometimes I catch her looking around her room with a puzzled expression, as if something feels off, but she can't quite put her finger on it. I don't know if we'll ever understand what happened that night. Part of me hopes it was just a one-time occurrence, a glitch in reality or something. But another part of me can't shake the feeling that whatever caused this is still here, waiting. I've started keeping a journal, documenting any strange occurrences in the house. So far, nothing as dramatic as that night has happened again, but there have been little things. Objects not quite where we left them, doors we swear we closed found open in the morning, shadows seen from the corner of our eyes. My friends and I have made a pact to never speak about that night to anyone else. Who would believe us anyway? But we know what we saw, and we're always on alert now, wondering if it will happen again. I don't know why I'm sharing this story now. Maybe I'm hoping someone out there has experienced something similar and can offer some explanation. Or maybe I just needed to get it off my chest. All I know is that I'll never forget that night, and I'll always wonder about the mysterious force that rearranged my sister's room. If you're reading this and you've ever experienced anything like this, please reach out. And if you haven't, well, count yourself lucky. And maybe think twice before watching horror movies alone in an empty house. You never know what might be listening. It was a calm, clear night in late autumn. The moon was nearly full, casting an eerie glow across the dark water. I had set up my gear at my usual spot on the breakwater, a quiet area away from the few other night fishermen. The gentle lapping of waves against the rocks and the occasional cry of a seabird were the only sounds breaking the silence. Around midnight, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the rocks behind me, when I saw her for the first time. She was standing about 20 feet away, a pale figure in what looked like a tattered white dress. Her long black hair was soaking wet, hanging in stringy clumps around her face. But it was her eyes that truly unnerved me. They seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I blinked, and in that split second, she vanished. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I must have imagined her. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I turned back to my fishing, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. About an hour later, I felt that same prickling sensation. This time, when I turned, she was much closer, maybe 10 feet away. Water dripped from her hair and dress, forming small puddles at her bare feet. Her skin was so pale it seemed almost translucent in the moonlight. Those eyes, though, they burned into me with an otherworldly hunger. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I blinked again, and once more she disappeared. Now thoroughly unnerved, I considered packing up and heading home, but something kept me there, a mixture of curiosity and an inexplicable feeling that I shouldn't leave yet. The next time I sensed her presence, I was ready. I turned quickly, and there she was, barely 5 feet away. Up close, I could see the details of her face. High cheekbones, full lips turned blue from cold, and those piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me. Finding my voice at last, I stammered, "Who are you? What do you want?" She didn't respond, just kept staring at me with that same intense gaze. Then slowly she raised one arm and pointed out towards the sea. I followed her gesture, looking out at the dark water. When I turned back, she was gone again. My hands were shaking as I reached for my thermos of sake. I needed something to calm my nerves. As I poured a cup, a crazy idea struck me. I poured a second cup and set it on the rocks beside me, along with a piece of dried squid from my snack bag. "If you're out there," I called softly, feeling slightly ridiculous, "I've left you an offering. Please tell me what you want." For a long while, nothing happened. I sipped my sake and tried to focus on fishing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then, just as I was about to give up and head home, I saw a pale hand reach for the cup of sake. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her materialize beside me. She lifted the cup to her lips and drank deeply, then picked up the dried squid and examined it curiously. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful, but there was something distinctly inhuman about them. She turned those glowing eyes on me again, and I felt a wave of sadness and longing wash over me. It was as if I could feel her emotions. She was lost, searching for something, reaching out for help. Are you a spirit?" I asked hesitantly. "Is there something you need?" She didn't speak, but her eyes seemed to soften slightly. She reached out a hand towards me, and I instinctively flinched back. But instead of touching me, she gestured at my fishing rod. Confused, I looked at my line in the water. To my amazement, it was taut, the rod bending under the weight of something heavy. I hadn't even noticed I'd caught anything. I reeled in the line, and to my shock, I pulled in the biggest red snapper I'd ever seen. It must have weighed at least 15 pounds. When I looked back to thank the strange woman, she was gone again. For the rest of the night, my luck was extraordinary. Every time I cast my line, I pulled in something impressive. Large sea bream, a massive flounder, even a prized bluefin tuna. It was as if the sea itself was offering up its bounty to me. Each time I made a spectacular catch, I'd catch a glimpse of the woman out of the corner of my eye. She never stayed long, just long enough for me to see that small, sad smile on her blue-tinged lips. As dawn began to break, I knew my strange night was coming to an end. I had more fish than I could carry, a cooler overflowing with my miraculous catch. I began to pack up my gear, both exhausted and exhilarated by the night's events. Just as I was about to leave, I felt that familiar chill one last time. I turned to see her standing at the edge of the breakwater, the rising sun behind her, making her appear almost transparent. "Thank you," I said softly, bowing deeply to her. "I don't know who or what you are, but thank you for this gift." When I straightened, she was gone. But as a breeze blew in from the sea, I could have sworn I heard a whispered "thank you" in return. I've been back to that spot many times since that night, always bringing an extra cup of sake and some dried squid. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of her in the moonlight or feel that familiar chill. My fishing luck remains unusually good, though never quite as spectacular as that first night. I've done some research since then, looking into local legends and folklore. There are stories of sea spirits, lost souls of those who died at sea, who sometimes seek help from the living. Some say they're looking for proper burial rites, others that they're trying to pass on messages to loved ones. I may never know exactly what I encountered that night, or why she chose to appear to me. But I do know that my experience changed me. I have a new respect for the sea and its mysteries, and I never fish now without leaving a small offering, just in case she's watching. Sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is full and the sea is calm, I find myself scanning the shoreline, hoping to catch another glimpse of my mysterious sea spirit. And sometimes, when the fishing is particularly good, I could swear I see a pale figure standing in the distance, her long black hair blowing in a breeze I can't feel, watching over me with those haunting, glowing eyes. We had hiked several miles into the backcountry that afternoon, trudging through knee-deep snow to reach our campsite near a frozen lake. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted to well below freezing. I got a roaring fire going while the kids set up their tents. Soon we were all huddled around the flames, sipping hot cocoa and sharing stories. Around 9 p.m. I noticed one of the students, Jake, kept glancing nervously over his shoulder into the darkness beyond our circle of firelight. When I asked if he was all right, he hesitated before whispering, I think I saw someone out there, a man in a red shirt." I immediately went on alert, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Where exactly did you see him?" Jake pointed with a trembling hand. "Over there, between those two big pines. He was just standing there, watching us. But when I blinked, he was gone." I grabbed my flashlight and carefully made my way to the spot Jake had indicated. The pristine snow showed no footprints or disturbances of any kind. Still, I did a thorough sweep of the surrounding area, my heart pounding. Finding nothing, I returned to the group and assured them it must have been a trick of the firelight on the trees, but I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Throughout the evening, I found myself constantly glancing into the impenetrable darkness beyond our campfire. The formerly peaceful silence of the winter forest now felt oppressive and watchful. Around midnight, I sent the kids off to their tents while I stayed up to bank the fire. As the last embers faded, leaving only the ghostly illumination of the moon on snow, a flicker of movement caught my eye. My blood ran cold. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a man in a vivid red flannel shirt. He was unnaturally still, with his back half turned to me. I could make out no features of his face in the dim light, but I had the distinct, skin-crawling sensation that he was looking right at me. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding thin and frightened in the vast silence. "This is a private campsite. Who are you?" The figure didn't respond or move. Fighting down panic, I fumbled for my flashlight with numb fingers. Just as I managed to switch it on, my eye was drawn to a strange shimmer in the air around the man, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. I blinked hard, and in that split second, he vanished. The beam of my flashlight swept wildly across empty snow. My breath came in ragged gasps as I spun in a circle, searching desperately for any sign of the intruder. But the untouched expanse of white revealed no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. I spent the rest of that endless night huddled by the rekindled fire, jumping at every snapping twig or gust of wind. When dawn finally broke, I roused the groggy students and insisted we break camp immediately. I made up some excuse about an incoming storm, not daring to reveal what I'd seen. As we hiked out, I couldn't stop replaying the incident in my mind. Who was that man? How had he appeared and disappeared without leaving a single track in the snow? The rational part of my brain insisted there had to be a logical explanation, but a deeper instinct whispered of things beyond ordinary understanding. In the years since, I've tried to convince myself it was all just sleep deprivation and an overactive imagination. But sometimes, on cold winter nights, I still dream of that silent, red-clad figure watching me from the edge of darkness. And I wonder what might have happened if I'd blinked a moment later, or if my flashlight beam had illuminated his face. I've never told anyone the full story until now. Even as I type this, my hands are shaking. Part of me hopes that sharing it will finally lay those memories to rest, but another part fears that by acknowledging what happened, I'm somehow opening a door that's better left closed. All I know for certain is that I'll never forget that night, or the bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Whatever I saw out there in those silent woods, it changed me. I've never been able to shake the feeling that for a brief moment, I glimpsed something from beyond the veil of our familiar world, something that was never meant for human eyes. I still work as a guide, but I've never led another winter camping trip. Somehow, the thought of being out there in the snow and darkness, with only a thin layer of nylon between me and the vast unknown, is more than I can bear. There are things out there in the wilderness, ancient things that don't take kindly to human intrusion. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, they let themselves be seen. To this day, I can't look at a red flannel shirt without feeling a chill run down my spine. And whenever I'm in the woods and feel that prickling sensation of being watched, I make sure to never, ever look behind me. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, most days I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But I know what I saw that night, and I know that the world is a stranger, darker place than most people realize. So the next time you're out in the wilderness and feel a sudden, inexplicable dread wash over you, pay attention. It might just save your life, because sometimes the monsters in the dark are real, and they're watching, waiting for the moment when you let your guard down. So keep your eyes open, your wits about you, and whatever you do, don't go investigating strange noises in the night. Some questions are better left unanswered, and some encounters are best avoided. As for me, I'll stick to summer hikes and well-lit cabins from now on. The deep woods in winter hold secrets I'm no longer eager to uncover. And if I ever see a man in a red shirt standing silently at the edge of my campsite again, I think I'll just close my eyes, crawl into my sleeping bag, and pray for morning. Because some things are better left unseen, and some mysteries are best left unsolved. Stay safe out there, fellow campers. And remember, just because you can't see them doesn't mean they can't see you. It was around 10 p.m. when I first noticed something odd. I was baiting my hook when a flicker of light caught my eye downriver. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of our lantern on the water, but as I looked closer, I realized these lights were coming from the opposite bank, about 100 yards away. There were 3 distinct circular lights, each about the size of a basketball, hovering a few feet above the ground near the tree line. They gave off an eerie blue-white glow that didn't seem quite natural. I nudged my dad and pointed them out. "What the hell are those?" I whispered. We all stood up to get a better look. The lights were moving, but not in any normal way. They seemed to dance and weave through the air, sometimes zipping left and right at impossible speeds, other times floating lazily in circles. It was mesmerizing and unsettling at the same time. "Maybe it's some kind of swamp gas," my uncle suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We'd been fishing these waters for years and had never seen anything like it. As we watched, transfixed, the lights suddenly shot straight up into the air, stopping about 50 feet up. They hovered there for a moment before plummeting back down, stopping just inches from the ground. No human-made aircraft could move like that. My heart was pounding now. Part of me wanted to jump in the boat and get a closer look, while another part wanted to pack up and get the hell out of there. Before I could decide, my dad made the call. "Let's check it out," he said, already untying the boat. With shaking hands, I helped push us off from shore. As we drifted closer, I couldn't take my eyes off those lights. They seemed to pulse and throb with an inner energy. The night was dead silent, except for the gentle lapping of water against our hull. We were about halfway across the river when things got even weirder. The 3 lights, which had been moving independently, suddenly snapped together into a triangle formation. They spun rapidly, creating a blur of light, then shot off in 3 different directions at blinding speed. I nearly fell out of the boat in shock. "Did you see that?" I sputtered, but my dad and uncle were too stunned to respond. We floated there for a moment, scanning the shoreline, when suddenly one of the lights reappeared directly above us. It hovered maybe 20 feet over our heads, close enough that I could feel a strange tingling sensation on my skin. The light was so bright it hurt to look at directly, but I couldn't look away. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like it was alive. Then, in the blink of an eye, it zipped away and reappeared at the top of a tall pine tree on the bank. This tree had to be at least 50 feet high, and the light perched on its very tip like some otherworldly Christmas star. My uncle, always the skeptic, muttered something about drone technology, but his voice was shaky. We all knew this was something beyond any earthly explanation. As we watched, the light atop the tree seemed to stretch and divide like a cell undergoing mitosis. In seconds, there were 2 identical lights side by side, then 4, then 8. The tree was crowned with a cluster of pulsing orbs. Suddenly, they all winked out simultaneously, plunging us into darkness. The silence was deafening. We strained our eyes and ears, searching for any sign of the lights, but there was nothing. Just as I was about to suggest we head back to shore, a low humming sound filled the air. It started soft, but quickly grew in intensity until it was almost painful. The water around our boat began to churn and bubble as if it was boiling. Panic set in. My dad gunned the motor, but it sputtered and died. We were dead in the water as the humming grew louder and the churning more violent. I gripped the sides of the boat, certain we were about to be capsized or pulled under. Then, as abruptly as it started, everything stopped. The water calmed. The humming ceased. We sat there in stunned silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When we finally got the nerve to move, we hightailed it back to our campsite, packed up our gear in record time, and got the hell out of there. The drive home was tense and quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what we'd witnessed. It's been a week now, and I still can't shake the memory of those lights. I've scoured the internet for similar stories, searched for any rational explanation, but come up empty. My dad and uncle don't like to talk about it. I think it scares them to admit that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. I know one thing for certain. I'll never look at the night sky the same way again. Every time I see a strange light or an unusual movement in my peripheral vision, my heart races. What were those lights? Where did they come from? And most chillingly, will they return? I've always been a skeptic when it comes to paranormal stuff, but this experience has shaken me to my core. There are things out there that defy explanation, things that shouldn't be possible. And sometimes, when you least expect it, you might find yourself face to face with the unknown. I don't know if I'll ever go fishing at night again. The thought of being out there in the dark, vulnerable to whatever forces were at work that night, is too much to bear. But a part of me is also intensely curious. What if we had gotten closer? What if we had tried to communicate somehow? These questions haunt me, keeping me up at night. I find myself compulsively checking the news for any reports of strange lights or unexplained phenomena in the area. So far, nothing. It's like it never happened, except I know it did. My dad, uncle, and I saw it with our own eyes. I've considered reporting our experience to some UFO research groups, but I'm hesitant. I don't want to become some crackpot laughingstock, and honestly, I'm a little afraid of digging too deep. What if whatever we saw that night doesn't want to be found? For now, I'm left with nothing but questions and a gnawing sense of unease. The world feels bigger, stranger, and infinitely more mysterious than it did before. I used to find comfort in the idea that science could explain everything. Now I'm not so sure. To anyone reading this who might have experienced something similar, you're not alone. And to those who haven't, keep your eyes open. You never know when you might encounter something that challenges everything you thought you knew about reality. As for me, I'll be staying close to home for a while, keeping my fishing trips to well-lit, populated areas. But a part of me knows that no matter where I go, I'll always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if those lights might appear again. And if they do, will I have the courage to face them? The day started like any other at the campground. My parents were setting up our site while my older sister and I explored the nearby trails. I loved the sense of adventure, the smell of pine needles, and the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. As the afternoon wore on, I wandered a bit further than usual, captivated by a colorful butterfly flitting through the trees. Before I knew it, I had strayed far from our campsite and the main areas of the resort. The dense forest seemed to close in around me, and panic started to set in as I realized I was lost. I tried retracing my steps, but every tree and bush looked the same. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and I knew my parents would be worried sick. Just as tears were starting to well up in my eyes, I heard the rumble of a car engine. Relief washed over me. Surely whoever it was could help me get back to my family. A beat-up blue pickup truck came into view, driven by a middle-aged man with a scraggly beard. He pulled up beside me and rolled down his window. "Hey there, little guy. You look lost," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Need a ride back to the campground?" Every instinct told me to be wary of strangers, but I was desperate to get back to my family. Plus, this was a family resort. Surely everyone here was trustworthy, right? I nodded and climbed into the passenger seat, my small backpack clutched tightly to my chest. "Which campsite are you staying at?" the man asked as we started driving. I think it's in the Pine Grove area," I replied hesitantly, "near the big playground." The man nodded, but I noticed we weren't heading in the direction I thought we should be going. The trees were getting thicker, and I couldn't see any familiar landmarks. A cold dread started to creep over me. Mister, I think we're going the wrong way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me, that unsettling smile still plastered on his face. "Oh, don't you worry. I know a shortcut." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to jump out of the truck, but we were going too fast. I clutched my backpack even tighter, wishing I had never left the campsite. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. My dad's voice shouting my name. The man in the truck tensed up, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Suddenly, another vehicle came speeding up behind us, honking frantically. The truck screeched to a halt, and before I could even process what was happening, my dad was there, yanking open the passenger door. In one fluid motion, he scooped me up and out of the truck, all while pointing his hunting rifle at the driver with his other hand. "Get out of the vehicle! Now!" my dad roared, his face a mask of fury and fear. The man raised his hand slowly, that fake smile finally gone from his face. He looked terrified, and rightfully so. My dad was not a man to be trifted with, especially when it came to protecting his family. Everything after that was a blur. Police sirens, my mom's tearful embrace, park rangers swarming the area. I remember being questioned by a kind-faced policewoman trying to recount every detail of what happened. It wasn't until years later that I learned the full story. The man who picked me up had a history of similar incidents at other campgrounds and resorts. He would target children who wandered off, offering them rides, and then, well, I was lucky. Many others weren't. The experience changed me. For years I couldn't go camping or even to a park without having panic attacks. I became hyper-vigilant, always looking over my shoulder. It took a lot of therapy and support from my family to work through the trauma. Now, as an adult, I still love the outdoors, but I'm always acutely aware of my surroundings. I volunteer with organizations that teach kids about stranger danger and outdoor safety. I want to make sure no child ever has to go through what I did. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that day. The smell of pine mixed with the musty interior of that old truck, the man's unsettling smile, the sheer terror of realizing I was in danger. But then I remember my dad's voice calling out for me, and I know I'm safe. I often think about how differently things could have turned out if my dad hadn't found me in time. It was pure luck that he spotted the truck and recognized me inside. If he had been just a few minutes later, I shudder to think about it. The incident at Palmetto Island Resort serves as a stark reminder of how quickly a fun family outing can turn into a nightmare. It taught me that danger can lurk even in the most seemingly safe places, and that trusting your instincts is crucial. I'm sharing this story not to scare anyone, but to remind parents and kids alike to always be vigilant. Know where your children are at all times, teach them about stranger danger, and have a plan in case someone gets lost. And for kids, Never, ever get into a car with a stranger, no matter how lost or scared you are. The world can be a beautiful place, full of adventure and wonder. But it's also a place where we need to look out for each other and stay alert. My close call at Palmetto Island could have ended much differently, and I'm grateful every day for the second chance I was given. So the next time you're out camping or at a resort, enjoy yourself. But always keep one eye open. You never know when a seemingly innocent situation could turn dangerous. Stay safe out there, everyone. I was on what was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a safari camping adventure in the wilds of Botswana. After months of planning and anticipation, my friends and I had finally made it to the remote Kwai region, known for its incredible wildlife viewing opportunities. We were a group of 6, myself, my best friend Jake, his wife Emma, and 3 other friends we'd met through our local hiking club. The first few days were absolutely magical. We saw herds of zebra, giraffes nibbling on acacia trees, and even caught a glimpse of a pride of lions lounging in the distance. Our guide, Themba, was incredibly knowledgeable and helped us spot animals we never would have seen on our own. Each night we'd gather around the campfire, sipping beers and recounting the day's adventures under a sky full of more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. On our 4th night, we arrived at a new campsite as the sun was setting. It was a beautiful spot nestled between 2 rocky outcroppings, with a small watering hole nearby. Themba explained that elephants sometimes came to drink there at night, but assured us they generally kept their distance from the camp. As we set up our tents, he gave us his usual safety briefing, reminding us to store our food properly and, crucially, not to bring any citrus fruits into camp, as the smell could attract elephants. I remember thinking it was an odd rule, but didn't give it much thought. We were all experienced campers and had been following the guidelines religiously. What I didn't know was that Jake had stashed a few oranges in his backpack, thinking they'd be a nice treat for the group. He later told me he figured such a small amount couldn't possibly be an issue. We had a great dinner of grilled impala steaks that Themba prepared, along with some roasted vegetables and rice. After cleaning up, we sat around the fire sharing stories and enjoying the peaceful sounds of the African night. Around 10 p.m., we decided to turn in. I was sharing a tent with Jake, while Emma was bunking with our friend Lisa. The other 2 guys, Mike and Chris, had their own tents. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when I was jolted awake by a thunderous trumpeting sound. For a moment, I was completely disoriented. Then I heard Jake cursing beside me and scrambling to unzip the tent. "Holy shit, there's an elephant in the camp," he hissed. My heart started racing as I fumbled for my headlamp. I could hear heavy footsteps and the sound of branches snapping outside. When I finally got the light on and poked my head out of the tent, I froze in terror. There, not 20 feet away, was the largest elephant I'd ever seen. It was a massive bull, easily 12 feet tall at the shoulder, with tusks that looked as long as I was tall. The elephant was clearly agitated, swinging its trunk back and forth and flapping its ears. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw that it had already toppled Mike's tent and was using its trunk to toss his belongings around. Mike was nowhere to be seen. I prayed he'd manage to get out in time. I heard Themba's voice from somewhere behind me, urgently telling us all to stay in our tents and remain as quiet as possible. But a moment later, Emma let out a terrified scream from her tent. The elephant's head snapped in that direction, and then it charged. Everything happened so fast after that. The elephant slammed into Emma and Lisa's tent, easily flattening it. I heard more screaming and saw 2 shapes scrambling away in the darkness. The elephant trumpeted again, a sound so loud and primal it made my whole body shake. Jake started yelling for Emma, and before I could stop him, he was out of our tent and running towards where her tent had been. I called after him, but he either didn't hear me or didn't care. The elephant, startled by the sudden movement, whirled around with surprising speed for such a large animal. I watched in horror as its trunk lashed out, catching Jake in the chest and sending him flying. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. I wanted to run to him, but I was paralyzed with fear. The elephant then turned its attention to our vehicle, a rugged Land Rover that suddenly looked tiny and fragile next to the enraged animal. With one powerful thrust of its tusks, the elephant flipped the Land Rover onto its side like it was a toy car. The sound of shattering glass and crunching metal mixed with the elephant's trumpeting and the panicked shouts of my friends. I finally snapped out of my daze and realized I needed to do something. I scrambled out of the tent, keeping low to the ground, and made my way towards where I'd last seen Themba. I found him crouched behind a large boulder, frantically trying to load what looked like some kind of air cannon. "Help me with this," he shouted when he saw me. With shaking hands, I helped him load large rubber projectiles into the cannon. He explained between ragged breaths that it was designed to scare off aggressive animals without causing serious harm. The elephant was now systematically destroying everything in the campsite. It had moved on to Chris's tent, using its feet to stamp it into the ground. I couldn't see Chris and felt sick thinking about what might have happened to him. Themba finished loading the cannon and took aim. The first shot missed, whistling past the elephant's head. This only seemed to enrage it further, and it let out another ear-splitting trumpet before charging in our direction. I've never been so terrified in my life. The ground was literally shaking as this mountain of angry elephant barreled towards us. Themba kept his cool somehow, taking careful aim with the cannon. Just as I was certain we were about to be trampled, he fired again. This time the projectile hit the elephant square in the shoulder. It wasn't enough to hurt it, but the surprise and loud noise caused it to veer off course. It skidded to a stop about 10 feet from us, shaking its massive head in confusion. Themba fired twice more in quick succession, and finally, mercifully, the elephant seemed to decide it had had enough. With a final irritated swing of its trunk, it turned and lumbered off into the darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. For a few moments, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and pounding heart. Then the air was filled with the sounds of sobbing, pained groans and people calling out for each other. Themba sprang into action, grabbing a first aid kit and flashlight. We found Jake first. He was conscious but in a lot of pain. It turned out he had a couple of broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder from where the elephant had struck him. Emma and Lisa were shaken but largely unharmed, having managed to roll out of their tent just before the elephant flattened it. Mike had a nasty gash on his leg from scrambling over rocks in the dark, but was otherwise okay. Chris gave us the biggest scare. We couldn't find him at first, and I was terrified that he'd been crushed when the elephant stomped on his tent. After several agonizing minutes of searching, we heard a weak voice calling from inside the flattened remains of the tent. Somehow he'd managed to wedge himself into a small depression in the ground, and the elephant's foot had missed him by inches. He was badly bruised and in shock, but alive. As Themba tended to everyone's injuries, I took stock of the campsite. It looked like a war zone. Tents were shredded, our supplies were scattered everywhere, and the Land Rover was a mangled wreck. How we were going to get out of here, I had no idea. It wasn't until hours later, as we huddled together waiting for the emergency rescue Themba had called on the satellite phone, that we discovered the cause of the elephant's rampage. While cleaning up what was left of our campsite, Themba found the remains of Jake's oranges, the peels torn to shreds. Jake broke down in tears when he realized his mistake had nearly gotten us all killed. We were all too exhausted and relieved to be alive to be angry with him. But it was a stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in the wild, and how important it is to follow the rules, no matter how small or insignificant they might seem. The rest of that night is a blur in my memory. A rescue team arrived just before dawn with medical supplies and a new vehicle. We were all treated for our injuries and shock, then evacuated to the nearest town with a proper medical facility. In the days that followed, as we recovered and dealt with the aftermath of our ordeal, I found myself replaying those terrifying moments over and over in my mind. The image of that massive elephant charging towards us, the sound of its trumpeting, the sheer power it displayed in destroying our camp, it's all seared into my memory. I've been on many camping and hiking trips since then, but I've never returned to Africa. The experience gave me a newfound respect for the raw power of nature and the importance of respecting wildlife. It also taught me that no matter how prepared you think you are, nature always has the potential to surprise you. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still hear that elephant's trumpet, still feel the ground shaking beneath its feet. It's a reminder of how close we came to tragedy and how lucky we were to survive. It's been years now, but I don't think I'll ever forget that night in Botswana when a simple orange nearly cost us our lives. I was so excited for our camping trip to Paying, Colorado. My boyfriend Jake and I had been planning it for months, a chance to get away from the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. We found this secluded campground online that looked perfect, tucked away in the mountains, far from any light pollution. The reviews raved about the stargazing. We arrived late Friday afternoon and set up our tent in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. There were a few other groups scattered around, mostly keeping to themselves. As the sun started to set, Jake got a fire going while I unpacked our cooler. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the smell of pine needles and wood smoke. It felt so peaceful. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire, talking and laughing as the stars came out overhead. I remember thinking how incredibly bright and clear they looked, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. We stayed up late, pointing out constellations and watching for shooting stars. It must have been around 2 a.m. when we finally crawled into our sleeping bags. I drifted off quickly, lulled by the soft chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. I'm not sure what time it was when I jolted awake. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized the entire tent was vibrating. There was a low, rumbling sound, almost like a jet engine, but muffled and distorted. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. "Jake," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Jake, wake up. Do you hear that?" He groaned and rolled over. "Hear what?" "That sound. Listen." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. We both fell silent, straining our ears. The rumbling grew louder, making the ground beneath us tremble. "What the hell is that?" Jake muttered. Before I could respond, a piercing whine cut through the air. It was so high-pitched it made my teeth ache. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound seemed to be coming from inside my own head, and then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. We looked at each other, wide-eyed and bewildered. "Maybe it was some kind of earthquake," I suggested weakly. Jake shook his head. "That wasn't like any earthquake I've ever felt." We unzipped the tent and peered outside. Everything looked normal. The trees were still, the stars still shining brightly overhead. But something felt off. The air seemed thicker somehow, charged with a strange energy. "Let's check on the other campers," Jake said. "See if they heard it too." We grabbed our flashlights and set off towards the nearest campsite. But when we got there, it was empty. The tent was still set up, camping gear scattered around, but no sign of the couple we'd seen there earlier. We moved on to the next site, and the next, all abandoned. It was like everyone had just vanished into thin air. A chill ran down my spine. "Jake, I don't like this. Something's not right." He nodded, his face pale in the beam of the flashlight. "Let's go back to our tent. We'll figure this out in the morning." But as we turned to head back, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I swung my flashlight towards it, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Jake shook his head. "See what?" "I thought I saw—" "Never mind, let's just go." We hurried back to our campsite, both jumping at every little sound. Once inside the tent, we zipped it up tight and huddled together in our sleeping bags. Neither of us slept much that night. As the first light of dawn filtered through the tent walls, I finally dozed off. But my dreams were filled with strange, unsettling images, dark shapes moving just out of sight, voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand. I woke up feeling groggy and disoriented. Jake was already up, pacing back and forth outside the tent. "We need to leave," he said as soon as he saw me. "Now." I didn't argue. We packed up our gear in record time, barely speaking. As I was rolling up my sleeping bag, I noticed something strange. A series of symbols drawn in the dirt next to our tent. They looked like no language I'd ever seen before, all angular lines and bizarre curves. "Jake, did you draw these?" I asked, pointing them out. He frowned. "No, I thought you did." We stared at each other for a long moment, then wordlessly finished packing. The symbols seemed to shimmer in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly at them, they were just lines in the dirt. As we hiked back to our car, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig made us jump. I kept seeing flashes of movement just beyond the trees, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. About halfway down the trail, Jake suddenly stopped short. "Do you smell that?" he asked. I sniffed the air. There was a faint, acrid scent like ozone or burning metal. It made my nose sting and my eyes water. "We need to move faster," Jake said, his voice tight with fear. We practically ran the rest of the way, our backpacks bouncing painfully against our spines. When we finally reached the parking lot, we threw our gear in the trunk and peeled out of there, tires squealing on the gravel. As we sped down the mountain road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing us, but there was nothing, just empty road stretching out behind us. We drove for hours in tense silence, not stopping until we were well out of Colorado. It wasn't until we crossed the state line into Kansas that we finally felt safe enough to pull over at a rest stop. Sitting on a bench outside the bathroom, we tried to make sense of what had happened. But the more we talked about it, the less real it seemed. Had we imagined it all? Some kind of shared hallucination brought on by altitude sickness or bad campfire food? But then I remembered the symbols by our tent, the abandoned campsites, that terrible high-pitched whine. It had all felt so viscerally real. We never did figure out what happened that night in Pying. We looked online for news reports of missing campers or strange phenomena in the area, but found nothing. It was like the whole thing had never happened. But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that low rumbling sound, and in my dreams I see those strange symbols glowing with an otherworldly light. I don't know what we encountered out there in those Colorado mountains, but I do know this: I'll never go camping again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I was an idiot. I knew camping illegally in the state park was risky, but I never imagined it would put my life in danger. Looking back, I should have just paid for a campsite like a normal person. But no, I had to be cheap and think I was clever sneaking in after hours. What a mistake that turned out to be. It started off fine. I hiked a few miles into a secluded area of the park, well off the main trails. Found a nice little clearing surrounded by dense forest to set up my tent. As the sun was setting, I got a campfire going and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful night under the stars. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of engines, ATVs, from the throaty rumble. My heart started racing immediately. No one should be out here this late, especially not on vehicles. I quickly doused my fire and ducked into my tent, hoping they'd pass by without noticing me. No such luck. The ATVs came to a stop nearby, and I heard gruff male voices. "Hey, we can see your tent. Come on out." Crap, I was busted. Figuring it was probably park rangers, I reluctantly unzipped the tent and stepped out with my hands raised. "Sorry, officers. I know I shouldn't be here. I'll pack up and leave right away." But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized these weren't rangers at all. There were 4 men, all wearing dark clothes and bandanas covering the lower half of their faces. They had powerful flashlights trained on me. 2 were holding what looked like hunting rifles. "This ain't your land to be camping on," one of them growled. "You best get out of here quick if you know what's good for you." I nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir, absolutely. I'm so sorry. I'll go right now." I started hurriedly breaking down my tent with shaking hands. "Make it fast," another guy said, "and don't even think about calling the cops when you're gone. We'll know, and we'll find you." That sent a chill down my spine. Who were these guys, and what were they up to out here? I definitely didn't want to find out. I shoved everything haphazardly into my backpack, not even bothering to roll up the tent properly. Just as I was shouldering my pack, ready to hightail it out of there, I heard one of them mutter, "Should we really let him go? He's seen us." My blood ran cold. I didn't wait to hear the response. I took off running into the woods as fast as I could. "Hey, get back here!" they shouted behind me. I heard the ATVs roar to life and knew I was in serious trouble. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The sound of the ATVs grew closer. I knew I couldn't outrun them for long. Desperate, I veered off to the side and dove behind a fallen tree, trying to catch my breath. The ATVs roared past, but I knew they'd be doubling back soon. I had to think fast. I pulled out my phone, praying I'd have enough signal to call for help. 1 bar, it would have to do. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? Please help, I whispered urgently. I'm in Cedar Falls State Park. There are men on ATVs chasing me. I think they might kill me. Send help. Sir, can you give me your exact location? I don't know. I'm lost in the woods, but I can hear the ATVs nearby. Please hurry. Just then, I heard voices approaching. He's got to be around here somewhere. Spread out and find him. They're coming, I hissed into the phone. I have to go. Please send help. I ended the call and switched my phone to silent mode, praying the 911 operator would be able to track my location. I curled up as small as I could behind the log, hardly daring to breathe. Flashlight beams swept the forest around me. I could hear the men crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. A beam of light passed right over my hiding spot. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain I was about to be discovered. But by some miracle, it moved on. "Damn it, where'd he go?" One of the men growled nearby. "Little bastard can't have gotten far." "Maybe he doubled back towards the road?" another suggested. "All right, let's loop around that way. If we don't find him in 10 minutes, we're calling it off. It's not worth the risk of getting caught out here." I heard them trudging away and breathed a tiny sigh of relief, but I didn't dare move yet. I stayed frozen in place, straining my ears for any sound of their return. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I finally heard sirens in the distance. The cavalry was coming. I wanted to jump up and run towards the sound, but forced myself to stay put. What if the men were still nearby? The sirens grew louder, then I heard shouting and the roar of the ATVs starting up again. They were fleeing from the approaching cops. Only once the sound of the ATVs had faded completely into the distance did I finally emerge from my hiding spot. I was stiff, scratched up, and shaking like a leaf, but alive. I stumbled towards the sound of the sirens, waving my arms frantically when I saw the flashing lights through the trees. A spotlight found me, and I heard shouts of, "Over here!" The next few hours passed in a blur. Park rangers and sheriff's deputies swarmed the area. I gave my statement over and over, describing the men and their ATVs as best I could. They searched the woods, but found no sign of the group. When they asked why I was out there illegally in the first place, I came clean. Got a hefty fine for that, but considering the alternative, I paid it gladly. The officers told me I was lucky to be alive. Apparently there had been issues with an armed militia group setting up camp illegally in that part of the forest. They'd been trying to catch them for months. I know I should feel relieved that I made it out okay, but I can't shake the feeling of dread every time I think about how close I came to never making it out of those woods. I still have nightmares about running through the dark forest, knowing that at any moment I could be caught by those men with their guns and ATVs. I've sworn off camping, at least for now. Maybe someday I'll feel safe in the woods again. But for now, I'm sticking to the safety of the city. And you can bet I'll never try to sneak into a park illegally again. Some lessons you only need to learn once. I'm just grateful I lived to learn mine.